Initializing startup. Status, immersion pod, optimal. Status, pod occupant, normal. Player 1 recognized. Loading profile and settings. Loading into the last game, Modern Age Online. Welcome user, Shaggy. Norbert Roberts, better known to his friends as Shaggy or Shags, blinked his eyes as the bright whiteness of logging in faded. The musty smell of Undertown filled his nose. He was so happy that he had set his login point to the underground city beneath downtown Austin, Texas. He would not have liked the long trek from that lizard player's airstrip. He stretched his digital body. Unfortunately, he couldn't change his height too much in-game, but everything else about his character differed from his real-world body. His blonde hair in the real world was now a dark brunette color. Also, his slightly bulging belly was now a nicely taut set of six-pack abs. He had the body he had once had in high school all those years ago. The sharp, dank smell of dirt, mud and sweat assaulted his senses, reminding him of his other changes. In-game, Shaggy was a werewolf, with all the bells and whistles that came with it, including heightened senses. He moved through the streets of Undertown as he got used to his digital body again. His increased hearing picked up a few fights and muggings going on in the back alleys of the city. Modern Age Online was a game about superheroes and villains, and Undertown was definitely a place for villains. Gangs and organized crime were rampant through the large underground city. As he cut his way through the streets, he noticed a logjam of people ahead of him. Not wanting to get stuck in the mob, he leapt 10 feet to the top of a nearby squat building made of rotted wood and corrugated metal. He caught himself on the rim of the building and pulled himself over with ease. As his foot hit the patchwork roof, however, it crashed through up to his ankle. He jerked forward and caught himself before he could fall, but he heard a loud scream come from inside the building. Shaggy chuckled. "Sorry, dude. Needed a shortcut." "Oh, I'll give you a cut, motherfew." Shaggy yanked his foot out of the roof and rushed toward the edge of the building. Not slowing down, he took a running leap, easily making it to the next building. Luckily, the second roof held. He was silently thankful that Undertown was overcrowded. The further out from the center of the town you got, the closer the buildings were to each other. Shaggy continued on his way along the rooftops of slums of Undertown. As he passed the scrum of people on the road, he noticed several men in dirty suits. They were all standing in a circle around a vendor's cart. Vendors and their wooden stalls dotted the entire length of the main road. The owner of this particular stall, who was nearby and looked like he had taken a beating, was currently pleading with one of the suited men. The other men were cherry-picking various items from the poor alien's stall. Poor bastard. Shaggy thought, shaking his head. Must have pissed off the wrong gang. Shaggy continued making his way deeper into the town as he thought about his first couple of days in-game. It hadn't started very well. First, his wife's pod hadn't come in, some sort of mix-up with delivery. So they couldn't play together as they had planned. Second, his chosen mutation of werewolf seemed to be broken. Lo and behold, the game had indeed glitched out. Apparently, the developers hadn't considered so many people would want to be mutated therianthropes. Werewolves, werecats, and the like. Then, shortly after he got his broken power to work, he got thrown in jail by some lizard do-gooder player. Although to be fair, that do-gooder had told him about Undertown. Also, jail turned out to be a great place for an inspiring villain. Another good thing was that AG Incorporated, developers of MAO, had sent out an email to mutated therianthropes informing them about the glitch that had happened and how they would fix it shortly. The only remaining problem was that his wife's pod still hadn't come in. But they had worked out a schedule and were each leveling their characters. Although they had agreed to not tell each other what powers they had picked. His wife was adamant they play villains, though. For whatever reason. Shaggy shook off his thoughts as the buildings started getting further apart. Meaning he was getting closer to the center of town. In the distance, he could see the giant circular metal monstrosity that was Undertown's chief attraction, the arena. A coliseum-shaped circle of metal where the denizens of Undertown beat the shit out of each other. He hadn't checked it out himself yet, but he figured inside had to be a gambler's dream. He cleared a big jump onto an actual stone building, probably a ruin from old Austin, and made a hard right, turning eastward and keeping his eyes peeled for his hideout. Well, what he and his friends were calling a hideout. It looked like it used to be an outdoor car wash surrounded by a stone fence topped with barbed wire. It wasn't a castle by any means, but it served for their purposes. I don't exactly know what my purpose is at the moment, though. Shaggy thought as the car wash came into view. He jumped down to the street and started walking, thinking about his goals. He wanted to build up a criminal empire, and he wanted to run it with his wife and friends. Although he wasn't quite sure how to go about it. He was a repair technician, IRL, so he did not know how to actually go about setting up a criminal empire. He turned into the car wash, making a mental note to replace the broken gate on the south side of the enclosure. Looking around, he was confused that Ren and Vlad hadn't come back yet. They had all agreed after helping the lizard with his trash-stealing mission they would meet back here. He decided to wait for a bit and began shifting some of the junk around the car wash stations. There were 4 stations where people could park their car under a large metal roof. Each station was full of various bits of trash. Shaggy thought maybe he should sell some of the stuff to the lizard professor. The player seemed to be a crafter and maybe he could work with some of the stuff. He was moving a large car hood when he heard movement coming from one of the stations. "Hello?" Shaggy called, setting down the car hood. The sound stopped as he moved toward where he heard the noise. Shaggy took a deep breath, and then let it out slowly, centering himself. Focusing on his hands, he felt the slight twinge of pain as his mutation changed him. He felt his hands and fingers elongate, light brown fur sprung up on his hands, and his fingernails turned black and sharpened to points growing into his werewolf claws. Letting out another breath, he brought up his newly formed claws and charged toward the noise. He turned the corner into the parking area of the washing station and scanned the junk. It looked like someone had thrown a bunch of trash bags and broken bicycles into the back of the parking space. Several trash bags shifted as something pushed them out of the way. Shaggy brought his legs under him, ready to jump at whatever appeared. The trash bags fell away and a tall, lithe figure revealed itself, sending Shaggy into fits of hysterical laughter. "Yes, it's hilarious," Vlad said, as he pushed his way out of the trash bags surrounding him. Vlad's neatly pressed suit and cape were stained with all kinds of garbage and dirt. Obviously, he had been buried in the trash somehow. Shaggy continued to cackle loudly as he grabbed his stomach and looked at his new friend. Vlad tried to brush his clothes off while giving Shaggy a glare. He plucked a stray banana peel and tossed it at the werewolf. Shaggy easily dodged out of the way and continued to laugh. He had met Vlad in the in-game jail he had been placed in when he had been arrested. Vlad was another mutant player, and he had chosen to go with a vampire-type power. He grew in power the more blood he drank. Unfortunately for Shaggy, Vlad was a role player. Vlad enjoyed acting like an old-time movie vampire, complete with what he called an authentic accent. An accent that he had a tendency to drop when he was annoyed. Seriously, why would the login point for this car wash be back here? Vlad complained as he gave up on cleaning his suit. Haha, Shaggy slowly stopped laughing and wiped a tear from his eye, canceling his transformation. Who knows? Maybe it's random? Vlad trudged his way out of the pile of trash bags and walked out of the car wash station. Shaggy followed, still grinning with mirth. It looked like Vlad had logged out after they had split up. Shaggy wondered what Ren and Slink were up to as he and Vlad got out to the middle of the enclosure. Vlad was looking around, a look of disdain appearing on his face. "This won't do at all," Vlad said, sinking back to his accent of replacing W's with V's. "D need overhead cover, and a better vol." Shaggy shook his head and sighed loudly. "It's just the rendezvous point, Vladdy. Once Ren and Slink get back, we can figure out where we want to work and start setting up our network." Vlad wiped the look of disdain from his face and dropped the accent again. Yeah, about that. I heard Slink tried to take off while we were at the dump site. Shaggy grimaced. Not really, he was just real squirrely about fighting heavily armed K-Tech security. It looked like he was prepared to bolt when he took a stray shot in the fight. Straight to Deathville. Deathville was the name the players gave to the weird world the game sent you to once you died. Once there, the player would have to solve a puzzle or complete a task before they were sent back to the game world. Probably with all your equipment damaged or broken entirely. Shaggy had been there a few times already, most villains had, but he wasn't keen on going back. He complained when we escaped from prison, he complained when we got down to Undertown, and then he complained at the dump site. It doesn't look good, Vlad said. Shaggy nodded. I get it, but he's a kid. What are you going to do? I just think there needs to be a conversation. And I gotta be the one to have it with him? I'm not his dad. Shaggy scratched behind his ears as he got annoyed. Vlad put his hands up. I'm just saying one needs to happen. Not that you have to do it. But a teammate who's not helping isn't really part of a team, is he? I hear you. How about we all talk to him when he comes back? Vlad just nodded before the look of disdain was back on his face, and he picked up his accent. So that is this network you wish to set up? Shaggy opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He did not know how to set up a criminal network. He was a repairman. At best, he knew about gaining new clients. People always needed things to be fixed. But people weren't really looking to be robbed. Luckily, he was saved from having to say anything by a loud shout, drawing both of their attentions back to the pile of trash Vlad had climbed out of. What the fuck? A large gray humanoid rhino came crashing out of the washing station, kicking bags of trash and random detritus everywhere. Called a Paranadin in-game, Ren was a player who had chosen Alien at the start of the game. Shaggy and the others met Ren as he was searching downtown Austin for a fabled undercity of criminals. With himself, Slink, and Vlad being on the run, they all joined up together and wound up finding one of the hidden entrances to Undertown. Seriously, why put the login point there? Ren shouted, displaying none of his usual calmness. Shaggy stifled a chuckle as Vlad said. Right? Ren patted the random bits of trash off his jeans and t-shirt before turning a grimace at them. We seriously need to find a better place to work out of. Shaggy nodded in agreement as Vlad raised a hand and shouted. Here, here. Well, we are all here for now. Except for Slink, of course, but we can keep an eye out for him while we look around for a new HQ. Shaggy said, looking around. We know what the landscape looks like? Ren asked as the three stood in the center of the car wash enclosure. Vlad and Shaggy just gave him strange looks, causing Ren to sigh loudly. I mean, what gangs are around here? Who runs which blocks? How is Undertown carved up? Oh, yeah. We have had little time to get the lay of the land down here. Vlad agreed. So, who do we know about? Shaggy asked. Ren rubbed his chin with his large, gray hand. Tinsel was a free agent down here, but he seemed to know a little. Shaggy thought about the Paranadin NPC they had temporarily teamed up with. Like what? What did he say? Ren grunted and shook his head. Not much, but I asked him why the police and everyone else up above haven't come down here and arrested everyone. Apparently, they don't consider the criminals down here that much of a problem. They have taken a "don't bug us, and we won't bug you" approach. Vil, but good for versus. VVS. Us. Vlad said, tripping over the last word. Shaggy grinned. Having trouble there? Shut it, mutt. Shaggy continued to smile as Ren spoke up again, his deep voice rumbling. Other than that, he was going on about how the Phreaks were on the back foot after taking down the Faceless. Both groups lost their leaders in the fighting. Also, it seems like a bunch of basilinoid aliens have moved into the Faceless old base. Basolinoids? Vlad asked, accent slipping again. Snake people? Ren smiled, revealing tombstone-shaped teeth. Lizard people. In fact, he assumed our professor friend was working for them. Shaggy shook his head. I doubt it. That guy works out of an airstrip outside of downtown Austin. Vlad snapped his fingers. Didn't he mention them? He called them the Brute Clan. Oh yeah, he did mention that he helped them kick out the Faceless. He even mentioned killing some lion dude from the Phreaks. Think that was the leader? Shaggy recalled as he silently thanked the gaming gods that Vlad seemed to have forgotten his accent again. Both Ren and Vlad shrugged their shoulders, unsure. Shaggy thought back to the other player, trying to recall if he had said anything else. He also asked that we don't mess with them or the Quinnica. Although the Quinnica might have leadership trouble too here soon. Apparently, he had some sort of deal with them that fell through and they attacked us above ground. We had to kill a bunch of them and this big silver bastard. Seeing the looks on the others' faces, Shaggy explained how he and the professor had to deal with a Quinnica named Blutchel, Gur and several of his minions. He even went into detail about Blutchel, Gur's giant transformation, where he grew in strength and size and they had to hit an actually glowing weak spot to take him down. It was a hell of a fight, my dudes. But those rifles we found really helped. Ren nodded slowly before he gave Shaggy a searching look. Wait, where are the guns, then? I left them with the professor. He was gonna work on them for me and Vlad. But guys, that means 2 of the gangs down here are weakened and 1 was wiped out completely. Vlad shook his head and gestured at the nearby landscape broadly. Yes, but how many others are down here? How big were they? We need information. Shaggy sighed. I know. Guess it's time for the 3 of us to head out into the city and see what we can find. Slink snakes would be real helpful right now. Ren nodded and crossed his massive arms over his chest. We don't want to wait for him? He could be doing anything in Deathville. So I was the only one who didn't set this place as his login point, huh? The others just gave him lopsided grins as they listened to Slink complain about being covered in trash. Why can't we stop so we can pick up new clothes? Slink complained again for what was, probably, the 20th time. The short teen pulled another bit of trash from his blonde hair as they walked. Shaggy just sighed as Vlad answered irritably. Because, Slink, we have more important things to do than pay for your comfort. Slink groaned loudly. I have trash juice in my shoes, man. This shit is gross. Shaggy tuned them out as they made their way back to the center of Undertown. They had figured that was the best place for information. With the arena being so close and with Slink snakes, they could gather all kinds of information from both the patrons of the arena and the random people walking by. After Slink had logged in, they had explained their plans and, in what was typical Slink fashion, the boy started complaining immediately. The kid was more concerned with getting the trash juice off his robes. But he also had other concerns. He had wanted to go back topside and lie low. The others had to explain that they were all criminals down here, so Undertown was, most likely, the safest place for them. Vlad and Shaggy had met Slink in the in-game jail. The pale, blonde-headed teen wouldn't tell them what he was in for, but given the way the kid turned bright red whenever it was brought up, Shaggy assumed it was something puerile. Slink had somehow followed them when they had made their escape and his information-gathering talents were extremely helpful when searching for the entrance to Undertown. But he was a grade A winner when it came to everything else. Slink was another alien player that had a telepathic connection with 3 snake-like aliens. One he used for self-defense, but the other 2 he used as scouts. According to Slink, his alien race had some talent for parallel thought, so he should have been able to watch his snake scouts while also helping in combat. But, according to the kid, it was hard. Which was Slink SA4, why should I try? Shaggy kept his eyes peeled as they made their way through the crowded streets. Ren seemed to be on the lookout too, but the big rhino man was a hell of a deterrent for pickpockets by himself. Shaggy was more surprised that, even though they were a decent way from the arena, the dirt streets were still almost full of people. He briefly wondered how many people were actually down here before he heard Vlad swear. "Damn it. I told you, we don't have time." Shaggy turned just in time to see Slink running off to a nearby street vendor. One of the many that seemed to dot all the streets of Undertown. Slink didn't even bother to turn around as he gave the trio the finger and entered negotiations with the purple alien clothes seller. Shaggy heard Ren chuckle behind him and turned to give the big gray alien a questioning look. "I wonder what he's gonna do when he realizes he's broke," Ren said, still chuckling. Vlad sighed and rubbed his temples with a hand. "Probably beg one of us to pay for him." Shaggy shook his head as he watched Slink. "We should be so lucky." They continued to watch their young companion as he realized his lack of money. Slink turned to them, but he must have seen something in their collective faces because instead of asking for money, the young man turned back to vendor, punched him in the face, grabbed a shirt off the vendor's stall and ran back to their group. "Oh Lord, he didn't," Ren said, laughing even harder now. "Stop, thief." The vendor yelled from his spot on the ground after Slink's sucker punch. Slink slid to a stop near them and gave them an incredulous look. "Come on. Let's go. We have to get out of here." Shaggy was more than willing to walk off again, but he heard Vlad bark a harsh laugh. "No chance, kiddo. Give the damn shirt back and then we can go." Shaggy grinned at the kid as Vlad sighed. "First off, it's a shirt, dude. Not exactly going to make us any money." "Oh, but stealing junk will?" Slink groused angrily. "Second," Vlad continued, looking around. "This is a town of criminals. You don't know who you just pissed off." Ren had stopped laughing and was gazing back at the street vendor and pointing. "Oh, probably them." Shaggy turned to see what his friend was pointing at. The street vendor, now on his feet with a bloody nose, was pleading with a small group of people all wearing black leather jackets. The group looked like a post-apocalyptic gang from another game Shaggy had played. They were all dressed in biker leathers and with multicolored mohawks. Shaggy assumed they were all NPCs, but in this game you could never tell. The vendor pointed in their direction, obviously bereaved, and seemed to say something. The bikers, for their part, mostly laughed at the man. But soon they started making their way toward their little group. Slink quickly dove behind Ren, as he was the tallest and widest of them. "Oh geez, come on, guys. Let's go." Shaggy shook his head as he looked over at the group of bikers. "Really, kid? You stir up shit and then hide? Besides, there's only 5 of them." Slink scoffed. "I'm a scout, dude. You 3 are the heavy hitters. Also, this wouldn't have happened if we had just run away, like I said. No. This wouldn't have happened if you hadn't stolen a damn shirt for no reason." Vlad screamed. "This could be a good thing," Ren said, as Slink scoffed behind him. "What do you think they know about the various criminal organizations?" "Probably not much. They seem small time," Shaggy said just as the lead leather-clad thug walked in front of them. The lead thug either ignored or didn't hear Shaggy. Instead, he seemed entirely focused on Slink, who was still standing behind Ren. The thug pointed a finger at Ren and in a nasally voice said, "Hand over the kid and we won't hurt ya." "Yeah," a thug with spiky green hair said from behind his friend. Vlad shot a look at Shaggy. Shaggy shrugged his shoulders and held up a hand. "Yeah, that's not happening. Maybe we could give the shirt back and we can all go about our business." "Hey!" Slink yelled from behind Ren. The NPC refocused his attention on Shaggy, taking in his short frame and snorting. He redirected his finger towards Shaggy's chest and poked twice. "You don't get it, do you? This is Red Coil turf. We make the rules around here." Shaggy guessed that if he had been a normal human, the finger jabs might have stung a bit. But as it stood, they just annoyed him. He took a deep breath and smiled at the lead gang member. Turning to Vlad and Ren, he said. Well, they might know something. We might as well ask. As he finished his sentence, he reared back and slammed his fist heavily into the thug's stomach. The guy immediately doubled over and started retching on the ground. Shaggy had tried to hold back. For all he knew, these were standard humans, and he was a werewolf. Naturally, most players in modern age online were far more powerful than regular NPCs. Vlad let out a long-suffering sigh as he seemed to vanish from his position next to Ren and appeared behind the group of thugs. Most of whom seemed shocked that their leader had been taken down so easily. Once he was behind them, Vlad grabbed two of the thugs by the backs of their shirts and flung them bodily across the street, where they lay crumpled in a pile. Ren also moved forward slightly, dragging a complaining Slink who had grasped the back of Ren's shirt. Ren walked up to the nearest thug and gingerly flicked the girl's forehead with a finger. Her head snapped back harshly, and Shaggy could see the whites of her eyes as she fell over into the dirt. Aiming a feral grin at the last one, Shaggy tried to channel his inner werewolf as he said, "Boo." The remaining thug gawked at his friends laying in the street before turning tail and running away. Vlad shot Shaggy a questioning look, but Shaggy shook his head. They would not go around chasing every two-bit thug that tried to shake them down. He looked back down at the lead gang member, who was still coughing and trying to suck the air back into his lungs. Shaggy smiled again as he lifted the guy up by his collar. "Now, we have some questions for you, my dude." "Then it seems VE should be somewhere else," Vlad said dramatically, waving his cape around. The thug gave him a curious look before trying to struggle out of Shaggy's grip. Shaggy shook the guy harshly before looking around for a place to question the guy. He spotted a nearby sheet metal shack with a roof made of 2x4s. He jerked his head in that direction and started walking toward it, dragging the unwilling gang leader with him. "Oh, come on, guys. We don't have to do this," Slink whined. "No, we didn't. But thanks to you being a damn idiot, we now have a source of information. So put your damn shirt on and be happy," Vlad snapped as he jogged in front of Shaggy and opened the door. Ren toddled along behind them, Slink still complaining at his side. The small alien was darting his eyes around, looking for any more gang members. Once Ren got to the door, he yanked his shirt out of Slink's hands and nodded to Vlad and Shaggy. "I'll watch the street while you two question him. They may not be too willing to challenge me because of my size," Ren said, turning to watch the street again. Shaggy nodded his head in agreement as he tossed the thug through the open door. Following, he took in the room. It looked just as bad as the outside. There was no furniture, appliances, or windows. It was just a squat metal shack with a dirt floor. Shaggy was grateful the game accounted for a werewolf's dark vision, though. He figured Vlad must have also been able to see, as the mutant vampire had picked up the thug. "You will tell us vat we want to know, you reprobate. Or I shall be forced to make you one of my children of the night." The thug looked at the vampire, confused, as Shaggy left the door to the shack open and moved next to his vampire friend. "Can you do that? Make more vamps?" Shaggy asked, curious. Vlad dropped his character again, to answer. Kinda. I bet it's on the evolution tree, but I haven't found it yet." "Doesn't that make it kind of an empty threat?" "Sure, but I still think my character would make the threat." "That's fair," Shaggy said as he turned back to the thug. The gang leader was still looking confused. The game didn't allow NPCs to hear certain parts of the player's speech. In-game AI would block out anything an NPC would find nonsensical. So as the thug was still trying to parse what Vlad had said to him, Shaggy took a proper look at the young human man. He was young, around mid-20s, dressed in all black biking leathers. The black jacket had a red spiral on the back, probably referring to his gang. His head was mostly bald save for the large, neon blue mohawk he had as a hairstyle. His hands and arms were stained with something. Shaggy's werewolf nose told him was some kind of mechanical lubricant. "Look, man. I don't know what you think I know, but me and my crew, we're small time. We shake down a few places for protection money, kick up a few creds to the big dogs, and rumble with the other small timers. Well, that was full of interesting information, Shaggy said, smiling. But what we are interested in are those big dogs you mentioned. I am interested in the small timers as well, Vlad added. Shaggy shot his friend a curious look, but stayed quiet as the gangster spoke. Well, there's the Raks, the Phreaks, Quinnica, and the UGB. My guys in the Coil and a few other small timers, the Blood Tigers, the Brashens, and the Needle Sisters, all work out of this area. So we kick up 30% to the Raks. Shaggy sighed. This is going to take a while, then. Vlad nodded as they continued to question their captive. The gang leader, named Terry, filled them in slowly about the various gangs. Apparently there was a group of crime syndicates called the Big Five that ran under town, but with the Faceless being taken down, they were now the Big Four. The groups had sectioned off the circular undertown into their own separate pieces, and occasionally would fight or work together as the mood took them. The closest of the ones Terry had mentioned were the Raku crime family, or the Raks. They were a typical crime family of the type Shaggy had seen on TV in the real world. Led by their Don, a mutant by the name of Donnie Raks, they functioned as a business. They offered protection services to the various stalls within their territory for a portion of their cells. But if those stalls were robbed, the Raks found whoever robbed them and charged the thieves a 30% cut of their take. Supposedly Donnie Raks turned those profits into a lucrative above-ground business where they sold illegal weapons. The Raks also ran the center of Undertown, the arena. The Phreaks were a group of mutants and failed government experiments that had banded together to find a safe place for themselves. After they had that safe space, they experimented with various narcotics and drugs to try to fix their condition. Their currently deceased leader, Leo, had started selling off their failed experiments as recreational drugs before he died. Now that he was dead though, the Phreaks had fallen into infighting and several gangs were trying to carve up pieces of their territory. Terry wasn't too sure about the Quinnica. He knew they were the smallest of the big gangs, and they ran some of the more esoteric businesses in Undertown, catering to the various aliens that called Undertown their home. They dealt in rare alien foods, or other various bits of sundries, designed to make life easier for aliens living on Earth. He knew that there were rumblings of more Quinnica and an elder coming to visit soon, supposedly to look at how they were doing in Undertown. So the Quinnica were currently sticking to themselves. The last of the Big Four was the underground government body, or the UGB. The most militarized of the crime families in Undertown. They considered themselves the only legitimate governing body in Undertown and said it was their mission to eradicate any and all criminal elements in the town. According to Terry, though, they really just spent most of their time collecting their taxes from the people in their district. Although, judging from their outdated police equipment, Terry said the consensus was that someone topside was helping them. Apparently, no one had ever met the leader of the UGB. All anyone knew was that he or she was called the governor. Terry was about to tell them about the smaller gangs in the area when Slink walked into the room. He had taken off his black robe and put on his stolen shirt, and nothing else. The shirt barely went down to mid-thigh and Shaggy had to avert his eyes. He was pretty sure the in-game AI would blur it, but he wasn't taking that chance. Shaggy rubbed his face in exasperation. You didn't think to go get pants while you were standing out there. And more importantly, why the hell do you not have any underwear? Who the hell wears underwear in a game? Besides, this is a mature-rated game. I don't need another step between me and the ladies. Slink answered and waggled his eyebrows. Kid, there's at least 40 stories worth of stairs between you and the ladies. Now go get some damn pants. Vlad snarled, still covering his eyes. Whatever. You bastards are just jealous. You can't handle in what I'm dangling. Slink said before he turned around and walked back outside, giving Shaggy and Terry an unobstructed view of his bare ass. He's gone now, vamps, Shaggy said. Vlad uncovered his face and shook his head. Seriously. We need to have a talk with that kid. Shaggy snorted. For all the good it'll do. He is young, opinionated, and stupid. You'd have better luck talking to a wall. Well, you at least gotta remind him who's boss. Kids like that need a firm hand, and you have to remind him there are consequences to his actions. A voice said from between Shaggy and Vlad. They both turned and stared at Terry, who also looked surprised that he had spoken up. Shaggy was about to tell him to shut it when he thought about the gang leader's words. He wasn't wrong. Someone needed to talk to the kid about his behavior. But, at the same time, that wasn't Shaggy, Vlad, or Ren's job. Gamers already had a pretty decent option for anyone that was ruining their play experience. Boot him. Of course, they needed to at least give the kid a warning. Shaggy sighed. Anyway, you were saying? Terry looked confused for a moment before nodding. Oh, yeah. Where was I? You're about to tell us about the local small-time gangs. Right, well, I wouldn't call us all small-time. A couple of us have done some pretty big things topside. Shaggy rolled his eyes. Yes, I'm sure. Just give us the rundown, okay? Trap houses? Shaggy asked, looking between Vlad and Terry. Yeah, drug dens. They peddle their hype out of them. Then kick up a percentage to the Raks. Who's their leader? Vlad asked. Terry grimaced. Big bastard by the name of Philip. Goes by concoction on the streets, though. Supposedly, he has some kind of mutant power. But I've never seen it. What about the others? Shaggy asked as he heard raised voices coming through the door from the street. I was getting to that. Terry snapped, seeming to think. Then there's the Brashens. They run a bar a couple blocks south of here. Spend most of their time stealing and fighting, though. Bunch of idiots spray painting themselves, and then running around trying to make a name for themselves. Used to be a bunch of xenophobic shut-ins until Melina showed up. She's their leader? Yep. What kind of power does she have? Shaggy asked, beginning to worry about the raised voices outside. Terry shrugged. Far as I know, she's a normal. Well, as normal as a quinoid can get. Vlad raised an eyebrow. Quinoid? Not the time. Shaggy said. Turning to Terry, he asked. And the last one? Terry grimaced. Well, they ain't exactly a gang. More of a family business that steals to fund their medical clinic. The Needle Sisters are a group of 5 mutant sisters. Tough broads, but they pay up to the Raks the same as the rest of us. The noise outside had elevated to full-on shouting now. Shaggy was sure he heard Ren and Slink's voice out in the tumult. He looked to Vlad, signaling they should go look, but suddenly Terry started laughing. Shaggy and Vlad turned to look at Terry, but the thug had turned around. The red spiral pattern on his jacket was facing them and the door. Before either of them could do anything, the spiral seemed to leap off the back of Terry's jacket, turn into a red tentacle that swatted at them. Shaggy felt Vlad move out of the room with his speed and tried to do the same, but he wasn't fast enough. The red spiral tentacle batted him backwards and through the wall right next to the door. The sheet metal wall tore easily as he cratered through it. He felt his regeneration ability already fixing the bruises and cuts as he flew out into the street. He slammed into the dirt road and skidded a few feet before coming to a stop. Shaking his head, he noticed he had landed right between a pair of booted feet. He was looking up at their owner and several more Red Coil gang members, who were all looking down at him and smiling. Shaggy took a deep calming breath and tried to focus on his partial transformation as he heard his friends fighting nearby, along with Slink's ever-present whining. As Shaggy lay in the dirt trying to get focused, a boot came down and slammed into his nose. Pain screamed through his face and he heard his nose crunch. Not for the first time, he questioned the game's pain settings. Letting his werewolf regeneration take care of his nose, he grabbed the offending foot with his transformed hands and jerked hard. He had to be careful as 5 4-inch claws extended from his hairy, elongated hands. Shaggy heard the person scream as their ankle broke and jumped to his feet, facing the gang of Red Coil thugs. He felt his nose snap into place as he glared at their shocked faces. Nearby, he could hear Ren and Vlad fighting, supposedly with other gang members. Slink had gone quiet, which he figured meant the damn kid was hiding. Shaggy flexed his newly formed clawed hands and plastered a grin on his face that he hoped looked maniacal. He may have not been a role player, but he was playing a villain after all. He saw the 6 thugs pull back in fear. Shaggy could feel sharpened canines with his tongue and guessed that his hand wasn't the only thing to change. He dashed forward, relying on his enhanced speed to take him past the first few gang members. As he dashed past, he raked his claws through several of them. His claws came away bloody as those he hit took a second to realize they were bleeding. Shaggy continued forward until he was in the middle of their small group. A random thug with bright green spiky hair looked terrified as Shaggy came to a stop in front of him. Shaggy grabbed the poor kid by his jacket and hurled him bodily at several of his buddies. He was grateful for the general stat boost most mutants got. It strengthened them and made them tougher than the average NPC. Add on to that his enhancements from his mutation, and these kids didn't stand a chance. He took a glance around and realized several of the Red Coil members looked scared, but a few of them had adopted Terry's backward-facing stance. Revealing that their jackets also had the red spiral pattern on it was well. Shaggy widened his eyes in realization as similar red tentacles flew out of their jackets and started toward him. He dodged the first one as it passed by him, swiping his claws at it as he went. But his sharpened black claws, already stained red with blood, came away even redder. He examined the liquid as he dodged the other tentacles. They seemed to move more sluggishly than the first one had. "Is this paint?" Shaggy asked aloud as he sniffed at the liquid. His werewolf senses making his nose sting as the scent hit his nostrils. "Yes," shouted Vlad from nearby. "They have a mutant or alien somewhere." Shaggy turned to look for his friend when he felt something solid slam into his back. He stumbled forward a bit before turning to see a trembling gang member with a bat. Shaggy dodged another swipe from a tentacle before backhanding the thug across the face. He felt and heard the guy's nose crunch as the thug was thrown off his feet by the blow. He glared back at the other gang members, daring them to try something, before he went back to looking around. Vlad was nearby, flitting between gang members. He would punch or swipe at one with his fingernails before speeding away. There were a few tentacles around him as well, but he was fast enough to stay out of their way. Ren, meanwhile, had waded into a group of gangsters and was swatting them left and right, sending them flying. He saw a couple of them hit the large alien with bats and metal pipes. Even a few tentacles were slamming into his tough gray skin. But Ren looked unperturbed. He was definitely the tank of their group. As Shaggy watched everything, he continued to dodge the odd swipe from the tentacles assaulting him. He noticed that not every gang member had a tentacle sticking out of his back, and every time Ren punched a tentacle, destroying it, the rest would get faster. He scanned the fight, looking for the odd man out, finding one. Slink was hiding behind a grimy metal trash can. Shaggy groaned. "Damn it, Slink. Why don't you make yourself useful?" Slink's eyes widened as he noticed Shaggy's gaze. The young boy looked terrified, not of Shaggy, but of the fight in general. He shook his head and flailed a hand at Shaggy. He obviously didn't want attention brought to his hiding place. Shaggy was about to scream at him again when a thought occurred to him. "Fine. Stay there. But find us this damn tentacle creator." Slink still looked scared, but after looking around at the fighting, he nodded his head and ducked further behind his trash can. Shaggy nodded as he looked around the fight again. He noticed that those goons that had tentacles coming out of their backs had to remain stationary. But those that had fallen unconscious or dead could still have the tentacles pop out of their back. Shaggy turned to help Ren as he saw a tentacle pop out of the back of a fallen thug and slither toward Ren's foot. The group behind him were still either terrified or clutching at the large gashes in their chests and stomachs that his claws had created. But before he could take a step, another tentacle swiped at his arm. He narrowly dodged the attack and charged, but not at the tentacle, at the guy who was wearing the jacket the tentacle came out of. Once he reached the thug, the tentacle continued to jerk wildly. Sidestepping quickly, he slashed his own claws down the guy's back, tearing the jacket, the guy's shirt, and some flesh. Once the jacket had been torn to shreds, the tentacle dissipated until it vanished entirely. Unfortunately, that meant the other two tentacles around him got that much quicker. He couldn't look around anymore as he now had to concentrate on the pair of them. "Destroy the jackets!" he shouted as he jumped a tentacle and swiped at another with his overgrown claws. He could hear the tearing and ripping of leather as the others followed his instructions. But the tentacles were becoming faster and faster and seemed to defend their hosts. Shaggy couldn't get close enough anymore. He wasn't as fast as Vlad or as strong as Ren. He was more of an all-rounder. Except for his healing, which he had dumped a lot of early points into cause he hadn't got his transformation to work in the early game. It still didn't, really. Shaggy watched his stamina bar drop and drop as the pair of tentacles attacking him grew faster. Pretty soon, he could no longer dodge and instead was being beaten back and forth between the two tentacles. With his enhanced healing, though, a portion of the damage being dealt to him was being healed before he got hit again. But they were still getting faster. "Blurg! I could use some help here," he shouted as the pair of tentacles batted him up in the air like a hacky sack. All of a sudden, the tentacles disappeared and Shaggy dropped hard to the dirt floor. His HP bar was low, but was slowly climbing back up. His stamina was moving at a much slower rate but was also coming around as he lifted himself up from the dirt again. He heard the thudding of feet and scattered yelling as the Red Coil gang seemed to retreat. "Thank you to whoever the hell that was," Shaggy said, still a little punch-drunk. "You're welcome," came Slink's voice. Vlad spoke up as Shaggy got a look around. "What the hell did you do, kid?" "We were the ones fighting." Slink looked disgustingly proud of himself as he pointed across the street at the vendor stalls that now stood abandoned. Shaggy saw Ren stoop down and rummage through a few of their victims' pockets as Slink marched over to where he was pointing. He noticed idly that the kid had found pants from somewhere. Vlad shot a look at Shaggy, who could only shrug his shoulders. Vlad threw his hands up and began helping Ren loot. Shaggy looked at Slink again, before deciding to help them. Soon he heard Slink's whiny voice again. "Hey! Come on! I want to show you. Loot first, kid. We need the credits." Shaggy went through some alien woman's pant pockets as he heard Slink huff in annoyance. Nearby, Ren kicked a few of the bodies over and continued his work as Vlad dipped a finger in a small pool of blood and licked it. "Anything good?" Shaggy asked as he watched the vampire grimace. "Just a few credit chips here and there. Nothing to write home about, and we can't know how much is on them without a reader." Ren said, kicked another body over. The body groaned in pain, and Ren quickly slammed a fist into the gangster's face. Taking a second look, Shaggy saw that the huge rhino man was covered in bruises. Large black welts were forming on the surface of his skin. "Hey, are you all right?" Ren looked up from his work and wobbled his head in a kind of gesture. "I'll be fine. But we could use a healer, or at the very least some health potions or something." "What are you at?" asked Vlad, referring to Ren's health. "Just under 40%. Ren said, standing back up. Shaggy nodded as he also stood and looked around. Between the three of them and Slink's half-hearted attempts, it looked like they had a small pile of credits to work with. Vlad walked over and the three shared the credit sticks. Vlad had also picked up a few vials of multicolored liquid and crystals, which Shaggy guessed were drugs. "Now what the hell are we gonna do with these?" Shaggy wondered. Once their looting seemed to be done, Slink was getting antsy again. The young alien was shifting from foot to foot. Shaggy thought he looked like a kid that wanted attention. He snorted when he realized he wasn't that far off. Can we go now? Slink whined. Shaggy shared a look with Ren and Vlad, who both sighed resignedly. Sure. Lead the way, kid. Slink looked annoyed at being called a kid, but he took off with an enthusiasm Shaggy hadn't seen from the young man. Slink led them up the street, past the abandoned vendors, and into a nearby alley. In the alley, Slink stopped and looked around. Shaggy thought he was looking for a way up. Which building? Shaggy asked, looking between the two squat 12-foot buildings on either side of him. Slink's annoyed look seemed to deepen as his surprise was apparently ruined, but he pointed toward the building on the far side. Nodding, Shaggy leapt up to the edge of the building's roof and swung himself onto the roof. He turned around and stuck a hand down toward his friends. Vlad just did his disappearing trick and reappeared next to Shaggy in a blur of movement. Ren was shaking his head as Slink was trying to jump up and catch Shaggy's hand. I think I'll wait down here. I don't trust these houses to hold my weight. Ren said. Slink turned to the giant rhino man. Oh, come on. It's sweet. I'm sure it is, but we really should get out of here. Ren said good-naturedly. Slink snorted as Shaggy heard Vlad grunt from somewhere behind him. Turning, he saw Vlad standing over a small body. It looked like an alien of some type dressed in similar leathers as the other Red Coil gang members. Vlad bent over to loot the body as Shaggy called out to Slink and ran down in the alley. This is what you wanted us to see, Slink? You capped the guy who was creating tentacles? Hell yeah, I did. Cheap bastard was hiding all by himself. Mo snuck up on him and bit his ass. Slink cackled. Great. You did your damn job. Vlad scoffed. You want a cookie for doing what you're supposed to? Shaggy gave Vlad a withering look as the mutant vampire stood up. Vlad shrugged as he held up several more vials of liquid and a small handheld device that looked like it was held together by tape and dreams. Shaggy sighed as he took the device and looked it over. After a quick search, he found a port that looked like it could take a credit chit. Shaggy sighed again as he slipped the device into his pocket and gestured toward the alley. Vlad followed, looking unapologetic as they both went over the side of the building and landed on the dirt floor of the alley. Slink was staring daggers at Vlad as the vampire just glared back. Ren looked like he was ready to say something, but Shaggy waved him off. Let them have at it. We need to get this out of the way, anyway. You do nothing for the damn group in the first place. Vlad shouted. You start shit, then you hide, and we have to take care of your problems. I found Undertown. Slink shouted back. Slink looked at Vlad angrily as Ren spoke up next to Shaggy. Oh, come on, that's not fair. We haven't really done much since we got down here except for that other player's job. Plus, he has already told us. He's a scout, not a fighter. Shaggy nodded in agreement with Ren's statement, but he also had to give his 2 credits. Sure, but he can still help in a fight, even if he doesn't want to get involved. Also, he was the reason for this whole situation in the first place. Sure, we got some good info from it, but it was literally something we could have avoided if he hadn't stirred up shit. To where? Shaggy asked. Above ground? Apparently, several of these syndicates operate up there, too. Or would you have us all run away from Austin just 'cause you pissed off the wrong person? Slink huffed, unable to say anything. He looked to Ren for help and the large gray rhino man shuffled before he spoke gently. Look, no one is saying you can't be the type of villain you want. You just have to think about how what you do affects the crew. What you do has consequences. It's a fucking game. Slink whined. A game run by one of the world's greatest AIs. Capable of creating minor AIs to run various quest lines simultaneously. This game, like a couple of other VR MMOs, was created to be an actual living, breathing world, or at least as close to one as we can get digitally. It will react to your decisions in real time and we will pay the price again. Vlad shouted back. Slink huffed and then sighed again, rubbing a hand down his face. Shaggy thought he looked like he was about to cry. Fine. Just what do you want me to do? Shaggy shook his head. That's not the question, Slink. What do you want to do? Slink threw up his hands. I don't know. I can't fight. My friends abandoned me. I've never even. Slink cut himself off as he realized he might have said too much. Ren pulled himself away from the wall he was leaning on as Vlad stared in shock at the young man. Your friends abandoned you? You've never what? Ren and Vlad's questions overlapped each other as Slink sunk to the ground and Shaggy was sure he saw tears. He didn't know the game would recreate that. Slink blew out a breath before he spoke. A couple of guys and girls from school asked if I was gonna be playing Modern Age online. I didn't even know what it was. I kept mostly to myself at school. So when they asked me, I thought they wanted to play together. Shaggy heard the boy sniffle a few times before he continued. I begged my dad to get me a pod. I argued that we have plenty of money and it would help me make friends. The others at school helped me look up stuff, told me what race to pick, and even picked a place where we could all meet. I should have known they were all lying when Lindsay said she was excited to meet me in-game. She didn't even know who I was before this whole mess. Vlad sighed as he looked over at Shaggy. It was apparent to both of them that neither of them had been prepared for this. Ren moved over and placed a large hand on the boy's shoulder. Speaking in a soft voice, he asked. Then what happened? Shaggy put the rest together in his head. So you attacked him. They all stopped you and then turned you over to the police. That's why you were in jail, wasn't it? Slink just nodded as Vlad sighed loudly and leaned against the alley wall. Why did you stay? I mean, why are you still playing? Slink shrugged. I figured I could be a villain. This game seemed to let you choose how you wanted to play. So I figured I could get back at them later. He turned a petulant look toward Shaggy and Vlad as he continued. I wasn't gonna let them win. I was going to make them regret messing with me. Ren sighed loudly and kneeled next to Slink. Yeah, you can stop that train of thought right now. But. No, buts. You want to get back at them? Just enjoy the game. Tisk. Slink clicked his tongue and looked away. He's right. Shaggy added. Don't get me wrong, you could probably hunt them down and make them pay in-game, but then what? They'll probably just treat you like shit outside of the game anyway, or let's say you make their gaming experience so miserable that they quit. Then what do you think they'll do to you outside of the game? I haven't even been to school since it happened. I don't want them laughing at me. Back to being alone again. Slink muttered. Ren glanced between Shaggy and Vlad before he said. Sure, while at school. But in here you can make new friends, have some fun, and work on some revenge. Slink glanced between them all. But you said. I meant you shouldn't take it too far. Grief them a few times, then let it go. Shaggy explained. Yeah, but I suck. Slink said. Yeah, but you haven't played a game before, have you? Vlad asked, realization dawning on his face. Slink cringed back, looking like he was stung by the words. Eventually, the young boy shook his head. Shaggy and Ren nodded understandingly as Vlad sighed loudly again. The vampire mutant rubbed his hands over his face a few times before he crouched next to Slink. What kind of experience do you have with games? Slink coughed awkwardly before he said. I played a few games on my wrist computer at school. Ren and Shaggy coughed at the same time as Vlad pinched his nose between his thumb and pointer finger. So your only experience with games is mobile games on your wrist computer? Slink just nodded as he looked between them all. Shaggy and the others stared at each other before they all sighed and turned back to Slink, who winced under their collective gazes. Vlad stuck a hand under Slink's arm and made to lift the boy up as gently as possible. Shaggy shook his head as they moved toward the end of the alley. Well boys, we have a noob that we just dumped into the deep end of the criminal pool. That's not too bad. Ren said as they exited the alley and started walking toward the center of Undertown again. We are definitely going to teach you how to fight, though. Vlad said as he led Slink out of the alley by the arm. Gone was Slink's typical look of annoyance and usual snark. In its place was a normal teenager, who looked a little scared at the prospect of having to fight. Shaggy felt for the kid. Getting used to the realism of VR was a head trip for a lot of first-timers. It could be scary if you didn't learn to separate reality from the game. Don't worry, Ren said. First, we'll get you to lower the pain tolerance levels on your pod. It's easier to fight when the hits don't hurt as bad. Can't we just turn them off? Slink asked. Vlad shook his head. That can cause even bigger problems later. Players get a little too gung-ho when they don't have to worry about pain. And you already have that problem. Shaggy snickered. Slink's face grew red. I was trying to act like a criminal. You know, uncaring, unfeeling, cool under pressure. All three of them stopped and stared at the young, pale alien. Vlad was still holding on to Slink, so he was also brought up short as Vlad stopped. They all stared at each other until Vlad, Shaggy, and Ren all just shook their heads and continued walking. Slink looked like he wanted to ask something, but Shaggy cut him off. You are also going to learn everything you can about your race. What they can do, how you train your abilities, and how the other aliens view your race. It's always good to know how the in-game factions will react to your very presence. Slink looked between all three of them as they continued down the now crowded streets of Undertown. He sighed before he asked. Why are you even helping me? I'm just a noob. Ren shrugged. We're gamers. It's what we do. It's what some of us do. There is always the occasional asshole. Shaggy added, chuckling. Vlad simply nodded as he let go of Slink and continued walking as the top of the arena came into view. Vlad sighed as he spoke, still not looking at Slink. Plus gaming is awesome, and you got a raw deal when your shitty classmates introduced you to it. Vlad turned and swept his long black cloak, which was still covered in grime and trash from his login, around and adopted his vampire accent. Please allow a couple of old hands show you how great games can be. Who the hell are you calling old, vamps? Shaggy muttered as Ren snorted a laugh. No way is he DPS. I don't care what the forums say. Vlad said, as he and Ren stood outside the arena entrance. Ren shook his head. The white horn on his nose flashing bright in the artificial lights outside the arena. I'm just repeating what I saw on the forums, and they all say Ophidians appear to be a DPS-type ranged archetype meant to attack from afar with their snake-like companions. Shaggy was standing nearby, monitoring Slink as the young alien was in the trance-like state that went along with controlling his snakes. Ren and Vlad were also nearby having their discussion on the role Slink was supposed to take in their group. As it stood right now, they had a tank, someone who was there to take a lot of hits, and 3 DPS or damage per second types. They were the basic damage dealers of the group. While the tank held the focus, the DPS would slam the enemy with as much damage as possible while a healer would keep the tank from dying. I get that, but he has to be different somehow. Don't you remember him saying that he could choose his snake loadout? He chose 2 little snakes and the big one. The little one scout and the big one attacks things for him. He doesn't have enough hitters to put enough damage on someone. At most, he is a burst damage glass cannon, and that's only if his big snake can do a shitload of damage. Shaggy nodded as he agreed. His snake took out that tentacle gangster pretty quickly. Maybe he could do an assassin build? He won't have to change what he has been doing since we started. Ren nodded as he sighed. Fine. But ultimately, it's going to be up to him, anyway. So we'll just ask him once he finishes scouting. About that. Shaggy said. Why are we doing this? Terry already gave us a pretty good rundown on the local gangs. Sure, Vlad agreed. But that was more of a general idea of the various syndicates and a few minor gangs. We don't know what's going on right now with the bigger gangs. Plus, there could be dozens of minor gangs, besides the ones Terry told us about. Shaggy just shrugged as he looked back at the young alien sitting cross-legged in the dirt. He could see Slink's eyes move under his eyelids as he mentally commanded his snakes. He sighed as he glanced around at the nearby villains and NPCs going in and out of the arena. Okay. How about you two keep an eye on the kid while I dig into my evolution trees? Did you get some points? Vlad asked. Shaggy shook his head. I don't know. I turned off the notifications because they kept dinging when I was in a fight. Vlad looked like he was about to say something, but Shaggy brought up his mutation evolution tree. Lycanthropy mutation tree. Attack LVL 5. Claws LVL 15. Sharpness LVL 3. Bone claws. Defense LVL 2. Utility LVL 5. Regeneration LVL 25. Limb regen LVL 2. Pain suppression LVL 0. Partial transformation LVL 1. Points 0. Shaggy didn't find any new points to spend after a quick glance through his mutation tree. He noticed the bone claws evolution was still red, though. He was starting to think that it was now blocked off from him, now that he had evolved the sharpness of his claws instead. Shaggy thought about asking Vlad, but he wanted to check his general evolution tree first. General tree. Toughness LVL 15. Thick skin LVL 5. Skin resistances LVL 1. Reflexes LVL 15. Quick hands LVL 5. Manual dexterity LVL 2. Mind LVL 13. Points 0. Nothing there either. Shaggy sighed as he closed out both windows. Vlad, who was standing nearby, obviously saw his slumped shoulders and laughed. Shaggy just shot him a look as Ren looked at them. You should know it's harder to get points for things that you've already leveled. The higher leveled they are, the tougher it is to get points. Vlad said, still smiling. Shaggy just nodded as he grimaced. Ren spoke up as Shaggy turned to watch the crowd again. How does that work? I know for an alien all I have to do is train or work out and I just naturally get tougher or stronger. There's no real metric to track for us. I mean, I have a character sheet and I can see my various bonuses for strength and defense. But for leveling up, all I get is a bar that gets filled up the longer I fight or train. I hear what fills the bar is different for each alien though. Different how? Vlad asked. Well, take our friend over there, for example. Ren said, waving at Slink. He is obviously a mental type alien. So his leveling bar is going to go up when he trains or uses his mental link with his snakes. It's a pretty simple system. Want to get better? Just use your power until the bar fills up. Of course, diminishing returns is a thing, so you got to mix it up, but overall, it's pretty sweet. Shaggy stroked his chin as he thought about the alien leveling system. It wasn't too different from the mutation evolution trees. We're not that different in that case. We have two trees. A general one and a mutation one. The mutation one is an evolution tree designed just for your power or ability, while the general one is one all mutants get. Vlad continued as Shaggy stopped talking to give the evil eye to a group of thugs eyeing Slink. It's just a basic tree that makes us faster and tougher than normal NPC, both mentally and physically. The general tree starts out with toughness, reflexes, and mind all at level 10, making us all around tougher and faster to start with. Shaggy finished warning off the group of thugs and continued explaining. While the mutation tree starts with 3 squares, called cells, each listed as attack, defense, and utility that all start at 0. Once you use your mutation, you start gaining points. You can then put those points into one of the cells on the tree. When you level a square 5 times, it mutates and then you have to level it 10 times and then 20, 30, 40, and so on. Each time a cell mutates, we get a new ability related to that square. So my claws are an offshoot of my attack cell in my evolution tree. Normally they'd just be longer fingers and sharp nails, but with my partial transformation cell, I get full-on werewolf hands. Ren nodded in understanding before he asked Vlad. Wait. Don't you get points just for draining people? How is that not broken as hell? Vlad smiled. Because not all points are created equal. To raise a square from level 0 to level 1 might take 1 point or it could take 100. Discussion on the forum speculates that the way you get the point makes it worth more or less, but no one really knows. Yeah, to get my utility square to level 5 took over 30 evolution points. It all seems like a giant crapshoot, but at the end of the day, more points equals a better chance to mutate a cell. A mutated square means a new ability. Although Shaggy turned to Vlad and asked, "Have you had a square go red on you?" Vlad's eyes got wide, and he laughed. Huh. Wow. You got a branching evolution already? Shaggy just stared questioningly at his vampire friend until he explained. A branching evolution is one where you can choose between 2 or more options. But once you make the choice, that's it. The other options are then cut off from you. So I hope you picked the right one. Shaggy focused on his breathing and centered himself again as he transformed his right hand from the wrist up into the enlarged werewolf version. Smiling at Vlad, he said, "Yeah, went for the sharpness upgrade over a modification, one that would have made my claws become bone." "What would have been the point of that?" Vlad asked. Shaggy shrugged. "No idea. Bludgeoning over slashing damage? So the mutation tree starts with 3 cells, while the general tree starts with 9? Ren asked as he gave them both a thoughtful look. Vlad looked confused. What? No. Shaggy saw the problem, though. No, we don't get cells for the free levels they give us. So they may start at 10, but the cell in the general tree won't mutate until we dump 5 levels worth of points into it. So the cell would be level 15. Yeah, so our mutation steps as the mutant community is calling them are 15, 25, 45, and so on for the first 3 cells in the general tree, but for everything else the steps would be 5, 15, and 35. You get it? Vlad finished explaining. Shaggy and Vlad just laughed as Slink rose from his sitting position and walked over. Shaggy was surprised at the notable difference just in the way the kid walked now. It looked like he had shed a weight off his shoulders. He hoped that the kid would curtail the smartassery now, but he doubted it. Slink looked between them all before he glanced over both his shoulders suspiciously. Okay, so here's the rundown. Larry and Curly both took a different section of the city and crawled around. We got a few bits and bobs from the locals, but nothing too noteworthy. But once we found where some of the local gangs hang out, that's where we got the juicy bits. Shaggy sighed. Just get to the juicy bits. We can worry about the small-time stuff later. We need to know what the big dogs are doing. Now wait a minute. Vlad interrupted. There's just the 3 of us and the noob. We are nowhere near ready to take a run at even a medium-sized dog, let alone a big one. Ren nodded his head in agreement as Slink gave a startled hey at being called a noob again. Shaggy ignored Slink and put his hand up placatingly. I know, but I would still like to know what's going on. According to our lizard friend, there were already some big upheavals in the Undertown syndicates, anyway. Not to mention when he and I stomped that giant silver bastard from the Quinnica. Slink broke into the conversation. Yeah, them space vamps are out in packs looking for information on their missing leader. A Mr. Branchweiger or something. Brownsliner? Blatzcooler? I don't remember, but Curly followed them for a bit, but no one knows what happened. Ren wiped a large hand across his forehead. Phew. That's good. You should probably keep your part in that on the down low, Wolfie. Shaggy just nodded as Slink continued. Then Larry followed a few of those mutant-looking guys from the Phreaks around for a bit. They were mostly selling little vials of something or other. Larry couldn't get too close cause there was this guy with, like, bat ears or something. He kept hearing Larry slithering around. Vlad grew tense and started looking around. Shaggy was about to do the same when Slink waved them both off. Oh please, Larry and I know what we're doing. Besides, those freak guys were more concerned about complaining about those new brute clan guys. The ones the professor was talking about? Shaggy asked, but Slink just shrugged. I guess? They are supposedly a bunch of large muscular lizards that moved into the Faceless Soul headquarters and set up shop. The Phreaks aren't exactly happy about that, I tell you, but they've got their own problems right now. Like what? Well, since their leader was up and killed, there seemed to be some arguments about who should take over. Ren snorted a laugh. Nature abhors a vacuum. Slink just stared curiously at the larger alien before he continued. Yeah, that. But that's not all. With the Faceless now gone and those lizard guys not really being a gang, the Big Five syndicates are now the Big Four. But two of those four are now reeling from what our two friends did. Vlad whispered in his role-playing vampire voice. He shot a conspiratorial look at Shaggy. Shaggy just nodded and thought about what they had learned. If anything, it was great news for them. Undertown was a powder keg looking for a match. Two of the major gangs were weakened, villain players were discovering Undertown by the day, and various new gangs were coming out of the woodwork. Shaggy almost rubbed his hands together. It was perfect if they could just figure out how to make their mark. Vlad seemed to be thinking along the same lines. Shaggy glanced at the vampire to see him grinning. Ren was more contemplative, though. The big Paranadan was scratching his gray chin and looking around without really seeing anything. Slink was trying to watch all of their faces at the same time as he shuffled from foot to foot. Shaggy thought the kid had more to say, so he gestured for him to continue. Slink gave a relieved sigh as he stopped shifting. That's not all. Today, the Phreaks are going against the Raks in the arena for the right to own it. What? Shaggy asked, confused. As he did, though, he realized the crowd around the arena was getting thicker. There were even a few scalpers selling tickets to an event that hadn't even been announced yet. He saw what he thought were a few players, buying from the odd scalper here and there. At least he thought they were players. Who else would buy from a scalper? Yeah, Slink said. Apparently the arena is like neutral ground around here. At least it's supposed to be. Whoever can take it, holds it, free of conflict, for half a year. Then they can be challenged by one of the other big gangs. Why the hell would the Phreaks go through with it if they are so fractured? Already? Ren asked, clearly confused. Because their big boss man declared the formal challenge before he marched on the Faceless territory. I guess he assumed he was gonna win and wanted the revenue from the arena to help build up the new area. Slink shrugged as he answered. So why not just call it off? Ren asked. And look weak? Shaggy laughed as Vlad nodded his head in agreement. They are weak. Ren argued. The surrounding tumult grew as more and more people crowded around the arena. Vlad picked up the conversation as they started walking as one toward the arena entrance. Apparently, they all had an unspoken agreement that what was going to happen shouldn't be missed. Sure, but they don't want others to know that. Better to send some low-level grunts into the fight. Sure, they'll get their asses handed to them, but they won't lose any street cred for chickening out. Ren just shook his massive head as they made it to the entrance. If you say so. The entrance to the arena was a massive entryway with no turnstiles, no ticket booth, and no guards. It was just a great big oblong hole leading deeper into the arena. Except now there were several people, in different gang colors, collecting tickets from random people. If they didn't have tickets, the taker would offer to sell them a few on the sly. Shaggy even saw a couple just pocket the money they were given and walk off. He shared a look with Vlad before the pair of them entered the arena. Shouldn't we buy tickets? Asked Slink from behind them. Louder than Shaggy would have liked. Ren, who was still standing next to Slink, slapped himself in the face as several ticket takers turned toward them. Shaggy shot his best murderous look at several ticket takers, but a few just ignored him as they marched on over to their group. Shaggy didn't see any identifying gang colors on the alien ticket taker as he approached. Which was probably a good thing, as Vlad didn't wait for the guy to say anything. The vampire mutant just flitted forward again. Moving at speeds, Shaggy still had a hard time following. Next thing Shaggy knew, the purple-skinned alien ticket taker was flung bodily away from them and toward the outer edge of the arena. Shaggy glanced around and saw a few of the more gutless of the obvious scalpers turn away, but still a few more looked even more determined to accost their group. Shaggy sighed and tried to focus. Partial transformation was a thing he had lucked into after the fight with the Quinnica leader. Apparently, it was something that was supposed to be locked in his mutation tree until he got a trainer, but he had somehow unlocked it himself. He was extremely proud of himself until he logged off and found that a few other mutants had accomplished similar feats. Apparently, the game had plenty of secrets for players to uncover. Shaggy tried to get his mind back to the calm place where he could feel the change he wanted his body to undergo. It was becoming easier for his hands, but now he wanted to go for something different. He felt normal, the twinge of pain in his wrists as his hands elongated. But he also felt a new pain in his jaw. He felt the skin on his face pull taut and he had to stop his instinct to fight the change. It was like relaxing a muscle that kept trying to spasm. With another deep breath, Shaggy opened the eyes. He didn't realize he had closed and stared at a few of the ticket takers who now stood stock still as they stared at him. He thought he could see trails of multicolored vapor flying off of them, but he ignored it and tried to smile with his unfamiliar face. "You lot are going to want to leave us alone," Shaggy growled in his new voice. It sounded a lot deeper and way more guttural than he was used to. The rest of the scalpers all either nodded or turned and went about their day, still trying to fleece a few dollars from people who hadn't bought tickets. Shaggy tried to flex the muscles in his face as he felt the change wash over him again. He sighed as his face pulsed with pain for a few seconds, before it let up and he turned to his friends. Ran and Vlad were staring at him as Slink was grinning like a maniac. "That was so cool," Slink said. "What?" Shaggy said as he looked at each of them. "Shags," Vlad started. "What do you think a short man with the head and claws of a wolf looks like to all the rest of us watching?" "Awesome," Slink said, still grinning. Vlad just waved him off as he continued. "It was the freakiest thing I've ever seen. Big ol' wolf's head and claws on the body of a human. You looked like something out of a horror vid, man." Shaggy just shrugged his shoulders. "Well then, I guess it worked. Now let's go inside." Vlad just shook his head as Ren shivered and Slink continued to laugh. The four of them made their way into the arena and followed the growing sounds of the arena patrons, all conversing and shouting. Shaggy sighed as they entered the first ring walkway of the arena. The walkway went around the arena in a circle, housing many merchant stalls. He could smell food and beer on the wind and on the people as they went by. They had to physically stop Slink from trying to buy something again. The young man only agreed to follow them until they had seats, but then he and someone else would come and get snacks. Vlad and Shaggy just sighed as Ren agreed to come with Slink for food after they found a place to sit. They continued inward to where the arena opened up and they could see narrow metal seating surrounding an oblong dirt pit. Vlad led them to a few open seats and they all sat down. Slink and Ren immediately left as Shaggy just shook his head at the spectacle of it all. A human and an alien were having a fistfight in the center of the arena, but no one seemed to be interested. A few of the patrons even threw their empty cups and trash into the ring, booing and demanding the main event. Vlad tapped his shoulder and whispered into his ear over the roar and jeers of the crowd. "Are we sure this is a good idea?" Shaggy shrugged as he hollered back. "Who knows? But beer, food, and fights? Sounds like fun times to me. What could go wrong?" For some reason, Shaggy saw the vampire slap his own forehead and stare at him incredulously. Shaggy didn't have time to ask Vlad what he was worried about because Slink and Ren had returned with beer, popcorn, and hot dogs. "So a werewolf's metabolism sucks," Shaggy said as he set his third beer down and looked at his friend sitting next to him. They had been in the arena for almost an hour, but all the fights so far had been between the small-time gangs or just a few random fighters. Shaggy, Slink and Wren had all been eating and drinking the various arena food from the stalls in the second ring of the arena. But halfway through his second beer, Shaggy realized he wasn't feeling the usual buzz games gave players who had been drinking alcohol. At least you can taste it. Vlad groused from his seat next to Shaggy. The vampire had also tried to drink. But as a vampire, he couldn't even put the stuff in his mouth. Apparently, it looked and smelled like trash to his in-game senses. He had to spit the beer out all over the row in front of them, almost causing a fight, but the group of aliens in front of them took one look at Wren and kept their mouths shut. Of course, nothing was as funny to their group as what happened when Slink tried to drink a beer. "This is such bullshit," Slink said from his seat next to Wren. His arms were crossed, and he had a sulky look on his face. "Watch your language, Junior." Shaggy chuckled as he guzzled down another beer. The others nearby also chuckled as the boy seemed to slide further down in his chair. Slink had tried to drink some alcohol and was immediately stopped by the game system. After giving him a notification informing him of his own underage status, the game's AI transformed the beer in his hand into a soda. Shaggy remembered how the boy had stood up in his seat and started shouting into the air about how he was only 3 months away from being 18. The legal drinking age. Wren, the only one of them to actually be enjoying a beer, smiled as he sipped slowly at his second beer and watched the two aliens in the arena fight. The two fighters were fighting over some dispute between two of the lower gangs. The arena could be used as a place to settle gang disputes, and whichever major crime family was in charge of the arena would make sure that whoever won got what they wanted. Of course, only the minor gangs in the owner's territory could do it. But with the Phreaks coming to try to take the arena from the Raku family, several small gangs from their territory were trying to settle a few things. A few of the surrounding people had informed them it didn't always work. Sometimes the crime syndicate in charge didn't care enough to try to police the lower gangs. But ultimately, the arena was another way for everybody to save face. The hot-blooded criminals who wanted a war could be placated or outright taken care of in the arena, while the more moderate members of the gangs could all make bets and maybe grow their power base a bit. It all sounded a little too much like politics to Shaggy. He wasn't nearly drunk enough to deal with politics. Luckily, Vlad was eating all this information up. The mutant vampire, after trying and spitting up several foods unsuccessfully, had engaged several individuals in conversation. He was talking up a storm with a bald turquoise alien with 4 antennae at the moment. Shaggy still couldn't accurately tell who was a player and who was an NPC in-game. But if he had to guess, he would bet that the turquoise alien was probably an NPC. Dylan players seem to be a bit more dramatic about everything. "This is so boring," Slink whined, flopping about in his seat like a petulant child. Shaggy just shook his head as he heard Wren try to calm the kid down again. Shaggy was beginning to think Wren was a teacher or something. He seemed to be very good with kids or teens like Slink. The big rhino man had already calmed the boy down several times already, and Shaggy was still wondering when the big man was going to just call it quits and tell the little winner to suck it up. "Calm down, Slink. Why don't you practice with your snakes again?" Slink sighed. "They're all tired and they kind of prefer to be inside me when they sleep." Shaggy nearly spit up his beer as he heard and saw several people turn in their seats to look at Slink. The boy seemed oblivious to how his words could have been taken. To his credit, Wren kept a straight face and just nodded understandingly. "Okay then. Why not just talk to them? They're alien serpents." "I don't think they talk," Slink huffed. Wren finished his own beer and looked for a trash can before he set it down between his legs and turned back to Slink. "So you think they don't speak, but you don't know. Why don't you try?" Slink seemed to think about it before a loud voice permeated throughout the arena. Shaggy turned to look back at the arena floor to find a flamboyantly dressed individual with a wand in their hand. Their clothes were a weird mix of circus ringleader and arena gladiator. Their pinstripe pants were a dull red and yellow color. On their chest they wore what looked like leather armor splattered with red paint. They even had curled, pointed shoes and a large red top hat. As they waved their wand about and spoke, their voice filled the arena. "Ladies, gentlemen, and all the rest of you scumbags. Are you ready for a show?" The arena burst into deafening noise as people shouted, applauded, and stamped their feet. The giant metal monstrosity that was the arena was literally shaking as thousands of people roared in acknowledgement. Shaggy gazed around, finding several people watching the crowd the same as him. They didn't seem to be looking for anyone, though. It was more like they were keeping the peace, or at least making sure people didn't get too rowdy. Wow. Criminal peacekeepers. Learn something new every day. Shaggy thought as he turned his gaze back to the ringmaster. "Well, you bunch of rambunctious reprobates. We have quite the treat for you all tonight. We have a three-way fight." There was a questioning murmur rumbling through the crowd as everyone turned to each and started whispering. Shaggy gazed around as well, shooting a questioning look at Vlad. The vampire shook his head and shrugged his shoulders. Ren and Slink also looked confused. It was supposed to be a fight between the Raks syndicate and the Phreaks. "Calm down, you bunch of disgusting delinquents." First, in the southern corner, we have our illustrious, benevolent benefactors, the Raku family. Cheers went up through the crowd as about 15 people stepped up from the north side of the arena. They seemingly appeared from out of the ground, but upon further inspection, Shaggy could see a small entryway leading down below the arena. There were 7 individuals of both genders, and both human and alien. But they were all dressed in dirty and torn pinstripe suits. All of them stood stoically on their side of the arena as the cheering crowd died down. Next in our north corner, we have our challengers. The group of disgusting runaway experiments who apparently don't know any better. One ass-kicking a month wasn't enough for the Phreaks. Shaggy's ears were again assailed by the loud clamor of people shouting, cheering, and jeering at the new group of people climbing up from the southern entrance built into the ground of the arena. Shaggy even saw a few people throw bottles at the group of Phreaks. There appeared to be about 12 of them, and each one of them appeared to be a humanoid, except they all had animal or insect characteristics. Some had animal ears, while others had arms or legs that looked like they had been grafted onto them from an animal. Whatever had been done to them seemed to have been done shoddily and with little oversight. But every one of them stood proud and ignored the crowd as they stared across at their opponents. The ringmaster let the jeering and cheering go on for a bit longer before they shouted everyone down again. "That's not all, you bunch of loquacious losers." There was a brief silence as everyone stared at the ringmaster. The ringmaster coughed and faltered for a second under everyone's curious gaze. A loud voice shouted from behind Shaggy. "What's that mean?" The ringmaster coughed again as he continued, as though he hadn't stopped dead during his speech. "No. We have a group of fools so stupid, so vile, so inept, that they thought they could steal from the Big Four. That's right, folks. Tonight we have a treat rarely seen in the arena. Courtesy of Undertown's own brand of filthy do-gooders, the UGB. We have for you tonight some rotten criminals." Shaggy had thought the crowd had been loud before, but now the crowd absolutely lost it. He looked around at the various people in the crowd. Along with himself and his friend, he saw several other people looking confused. He was willing to bet the other confused people were also players. Shaggy was trying to remember the faces of other players as Ren roughly gripped his shoulder and spun him back toward the arena. He was about to shout a question at his friend when he saw what Ren wanted him to see. The small group of criminals were being thrown into the arena from the stands by a bunch of guys in police tactical gear wielding what looked like stun batons. Among the group was a Paranaiden that looked oddly familiar to Shaggy. He spun to look at Vlad and Ren. Vlad just shrugged his shoulders, unsure, while Ren nodded his head with absolute certainty. Slink was looking between them all before he got an incredulous look upon his face. "There's no way," he shouted over the still cheering crowd. Vlad looked unconvinced as he stared at the group of criminals still being thrown into the arena. "How can you be sure, Ren?" "Yeah, dude. No offense, but you all look kind of similar. Slink shouted. Shaggy just stared at the group as they all collected themselves on the arena floor. They all looked beaten and ragged. They were all wearing tattered clothes. Whatever they had been through, none of them looked good. Ren spoke up over the cheering that was finally dying down. Trust me. I don't know how I know. I think the game is telling me that the Paranaiden is someone I know. It's probably because I am also a Paranaiden. Like I can tell other Paranaidens apart, because I am one. Shaggy gave a half nod in acknowledgement as he turned back to the conversation. Not the weirdest thing a full immersion game will do. Vlad seemed to think about it for a bit before he agreed. Okay. Sure. It's tinsel. But what can we do about it? Do we really want to piss off 2 or 3 of the biggest gangs in Undertown for an NPC? Not to mention ruin everyone's fun? This crowd looks like it'll rip us apart. Ren looked ready to argue, but a voice from the row of seats ahead of them spoke up. Huh. Everyone out here would love it if you ran out there and caused a little trouble. The speaker was a purple-colored alien that had 2 large pearl-white horns sticking up from his head. Another similar-looking alien next to him was nodding along. Yeah, if one of them's is in your guys' crew, you can tell one of them UGB grunts, and they'll toss you in too. Shaggy went to look between Ren and Vlad. But Ren was already up and moving toward one guard that was patrolling the walkways. Vlad looked annoyed, and Shaggy could only let a bark of laughter as Ren got closer to the guard. He moved to join Ren, waving at Vlad to follow. The vampire started complaining under his breath, but he followed along. Wait for me. Slink shouted, standing up. But Shaggy put a hand on his shoulder and kept the young alien seated. Nope. You need to find us an exit. Use those snakes of yours and find us an escape route in case we have to make a run for it. Slink looked like he wanted to argue, but he must have thought better of it 'cause he got up and made to walk out of the stands. Shaggy sighed as he shuffled his way past the other people in his row and started walking toward Ren and Vlad, who were in a conversation with the guard. All weapons must be turned in before we allow you to help your criminal friend. The guard said as he took in Shaggy's appearance. All 3 of them patted their pant legs and raised their hands, showing that they didn't have any weapons. The guard looked annoyed, but he continued with his speech and as he glared at each of them. Shaggy met the human's gaze and just stared back until he shifted his glare toward Vlad, which didn't go any better for him. We caught your Paranaiden friend with several weapons that obviously broke the illegal weapons provision of the law of Undertown. Ren snorted angrily. There are laws in Undertown? The guard looked annoyed. Of course there are. Handed down from the governor of Undertown themselves. Now. Do you know where your friend got these weapons? All 3 of them just stared dead-eyed at the guard until he clicked his teeth in annoyance and waved them down toward the rim of the arena where the seats met the pit. Just head on down and I'll let the others know you are going to defend your fellow gang member. Shaggy almost wanted to correct the guard. Tinsel wasn't really a part of their gang. He was just an NPC they had met while working a job for another player. But it really wasn't worth it, and Ren was already making his way down toward the arena pit. Vlad and Shaggy shared a look before they both just sighed and followed their large friend. A few in the crowd seemed to cotton on to what was happening. As the 3 of them got to the rim of the pit, several people were cheering and jeering again, and Shaggy no longer heard the ringmaster hyping up the fight. As Ren went over the edge into the arena proper, Shaggy looked around at all the onlookers. His eyes caught movement, and he spun to see Vlad raising a fist in the air and waving back at the crowd. What the hell, dude? Vlad continued to wave back at the crowd as he said. Well, we wanted to get our names out there. Can you think of a better way other than going toe-to-toe with 2 of the biggest gangs down here? I'd prefer it if we didn't have to risk almost certain death. Shaggy said as he went over the side and into the arena pit. Well, it's not like they are going to announce our names, and we get to show the other unaffiliated NPCs and players down here that we'll stick by them in a fight. It's a good look for us either way, said Vlad as he used his vampire speed to run down to the pit floor. The dirt kicked up as Vlad stopped next to Shaggy. Yeah, I'm sure showing others how well we can take an ass kicking will do great things for our rep. The two of them crossed the arena toward Tinsel, Ren walking slowly ahead of them. The ringmaster in the middle was standing stock still as Ren approached. Not in fear, it looked like the fancily dressed individual wasn't even aware of the large Paranaiden's approach. It looked to Shaggy like the ringmaster was receiving orders through some means. Sure enough, just as Ren passed them in the middle of the arena and continued walking toward the other side, the ringmaster burst into motion again, shouting out to the crowd. It looks like we have another wrinkle on our tapestry of pain tonight, maggots. One of our dastardly criminals was apparently part of a crew. And they are here tonight to help defend their poor lost member. The ringmaster skipped around as Shaggy and Vlad grew closer on their own journey across the arena. Shaggy did his best to ignore the flamboyant ringmaster and make his way across as stoically as possible, but Vlad was still next to him, waving and throwing the occasional finger at the crowd. The ringmaster skipped closer to them and Shaggy saw they were clearly an alien of some kind. They shoved their wand at Shaggy as they kept pace with both him and Vlad. So, anything you want to say to your poor wayward member? No. Shaggy said shortly, but Vlad quickly rushed over and spoke into the wand. I would just like to say that we are terribly ashamed that they got caught. Any member of our crew should know better. But then again, they weren't holding anything important to the crew, so this is not a big deal. Vlad was hamming up his role-playing vampire accent as the ringmaster listened in with what Shaggy was sure was false interest. After Vlad finished, the ringmaster chuckled into their wand before asking in mock curiosity. What? Really? Weren't they caught with some nasty bits of weaponry? Vlad grinned, showing off his enlarged fangs. Oh please, we are not concerned about such petty trinkets. Shaggy turned around as they got closer to the far side of the arena where the so-called criminals were gathered. Easy Vlad. Vlad gave Shaggy a look before giving a subtle nod, then going back to his vampire accent. Oh you be careful, Volfie. We vampires fear nothing. The ringmaster looked between them both before they got the far-off look in their eyes again. The conversation must have been quicker this time, as they almost immediately jumped back into character. They ran around Vlad and Shaggy as they finally joined Ren, who was talking quietly with Tinsel. Ladies and gentlemen. It looks like the festivities are finally ready to get underway. Make sure your bets are placed with a bona fide Raku bookie. Also, remember that loans are available in the offices by the concession stands. The ringmaster made it back to the center of the ring, where a large metal platform was rising slowly into the air. They jumped aboard and continued hyping up the crowd. Remember folks. This one is for all the marbles. If the Phreaks succeed, they will be awarded ownership of this fine establishment. But if the mighty Rak family defends themselves, then it's 6 more weeks of winter for the Undertown Arena. The metal platform they were standing on finally stopped raising up. The ringmaster laid down and looked over the edge at Shaggy and the rest of the criminals. Their voice grew sarcastically sad as they added. And if our poor petty criminals manage to not only survive, but thrive and then win? Then they shall all be awarded full pardons from the one and only underground government body. Shall we all wish them luck? A chorus of cheers and boos echoed in Shaggy's ears as he turned to look at the criminals standing with him. Aside from Vlad and Ren, they all looked beaten and worn down. Several of them sported large bruises, and some were even limping. Vlad was standing near Ren, swapping his gazes between the Phreaks and the Rak gang members. Shaggy moved closer toward his friends as the cheering grew and grew. So, do we have a plan, or is this going to be a giant melee? I don't think this is going to be a melee. More of a massacre. Vlad said, as he continued to watch both groups at either end of the arena. Ren and Tinsel finished their quiet conversation and Shaggy gave them a nod as he asked. What makes you say that? Vlad turned to look at Shaggy, exasperation in his eyes. They are both looking at us like we just kicked their pets. Shaggy quickly turned to observe the different groups and, sure enough, they were both staring daggers at their group. What the hell is that about? Vlad shrugged, and Ren also shook his head. Shaggy saw several Rak gang members summon balls of fire, water, and ice, while others simply pulled pipes and large machetes out of their coats. Across from them, the Phreaks brandished their claws, and several of them flew up into the air with an insect-like wings. Shaggy sighed and tried to find the zen-like state that helped him transform his hands. As he felt the twinge of pain in his hands, Shaggy turned to his friends and grinned. Shaggy's shout of defiance was almost drowned out by the tumult of the crowd, but both Vlad and Ren grinned back at him as somewhere in the arena, a loud horn blew. Shaggy assumed that was the start of the festivities, as several criminals started running in various directions. Some even tried to climb the wall out of the arena. They were met with the stun batons of the guards who had thrown them over. Which group first? Ren shouted. Mages first. Vlad shouted back as several fireballs and ice shard landed in the dirt near where they were standing. Shaggy saw two criminals go down as shards of ice exploded in the dirt and pierced through their chests. He figured it was as good a place to start as any, and he turned and started running, trying to keep an eye out for any more spells. He thought he could hear the others behind him, but the noise of the arena was just too much. He dodged to the side as several more fireballs came hurtling toward him. He felt the heat from the fire pass him as he tried to stay upright and kept running. A loud bang sounded in his ears and a sharp pain flared up on his left side. He quickly realized he had dodged into one of the mage's ice grenades. Shags! He heard someone shout. Keep going! Shaggy shouted back, wincing as the ice shards were pushed out of his body while he ran. Not for the first time, he was thankful that his mutation had glitched when he first started. It had made him toss a lot of his early evolution points into his regeneration ability. Soon all the ice shards seemed to be gone, along with the pain. He wasn't sure how long he could keep healing himself, but he really didn't want to test it. Ahead, he saw the group of Raks. Vlad was already there, tearing into a few of the more unfortunate ones. But the melee gang members had formed a phalanx around the casters and were doing their best to keep him away. That is, until Ren and Tinsel hit them like a ton of bricks. Shaggy smiled as he tried to move faster and join the fray. He could see a few of the Rakamages turning their spells on the two massive Paranadons. Shaggy spread his claws as he rushed forward into the fight. His body felt like it wanted to get lower to the ground, and he had to fight the urge to put his elongated arms on the ground and lope on all fours. The feeling dissipated as he hit the melee where Vlad, Ren, and a few of the other criminals were fighting. They were all trying to push past the ring of about 10 gang members that were defending the caster. He tried not to think about the other side of the arena and the Phreaks as he ducked under a wild swing from a jerk with a metal bat. He raked his claws up the poor guy's chest and felt warm blood coat his claws. The gang member went down screaming, drawing more attention to Shaggy. He saw two gang members move away from the fast-moving Vlad and charge him. Thinking quickly, he dove at the left one's legs, slashing his claws out and rolling in the dirt before he popped up to his feet. He saw the gang member go down screaming as his claws had cut off their left leg just above the knee. He momentarily thought about his sharpness upgrade, but pain flared in his head and his vision went blurry as something collided with the back of his head. Shaggy did his best to ignore the pain as he slashed wildly in the voice's direction. He felt his claws come into contact with something, but instead of cutting through, the claws on his hand bounced off and he had to backpedal. As he looked at his assailant, he saw a Raku gang member who was obviously a mutant or an alien. Her skin was the silver color of metal and she was wielding a large metal pipe. There were claws marks in her shirt by her stomach. She was staring wide-eyed at the small nicks in her metal-like flesh under her clothes before she glanced back up at Shaggy. Puppies got claws, huh? Shaggy chuckled. You haven't seen anything yet. Shaggy was about to charge her, but a fireball smacked him in the side. He felt his clothes catch fire, and he quickly hit the dirt as the flames bit into his skin. He thought he could hear laughter as he rolled away. Once the pain and heat died down, he popped back to his feet and tried to orient himself again. He was just in time to see the metal woman swing her metal pipe at his chest. He lashed out at the pipe with his claws and grinned as he felt his claws cut through the pipe. The metal woman stared at her broken weapon angrily before she tossed the rest of it away. Shaggy grinned and moved around her, trying to keep the mages in view. As the woman got into a fighting stance, her angry eyes turned curious. Shaggy was sure she was watching his red and crispy right side heel right in front of her. But he didn't need her shouting out his secrets to her friends, so he attacked. He went for her legs, diving into the dirt again. He felt the wind from a powerful punch miss his head as he rolled past her and came out just behind her. Thinking quickly, he put his shoulder into the back of her knee and lifted. She came up slowly, sitting roughly on his shoulder, nearly dislocating it. He grit his teeth as he tilted further backwards, slamming her down with a sort of suplex. He heard the air leave her lungs as he quickly stood back up. He momentarily thought about scratching at her face until he finally got to something important. But the smell of burning flesh and blood drew his attention back to the mages. Vlad, Ren, and Tinsel were all engaged in fights with various other gang members. He was surprised to see his vampire friend's face was scorched and blackened, probably from another fireball. Even more surprising was the large, human-looking man that was going mano-a-rhino with Ren. The pair were slugging it out like a pair of boxers. Tinsel was fighting off a few gang members near Ren, but their previous beating was obviously hindering them. He made a quick decision and ignored the winded metal woman and charged toward the mages. He had a clear shot to the group of mage who were still tossing spells at the various criminals fighting their fellow gang members. A few saw Shaggy charging at them and tossed a few ice and fireballs at him. Shaggy didn't take any chances this time and just dove forward into a roll and came up sprinting again. As he was about to rip his claws into one of the smug-looking mages, he felt himself slam into an invisible wall and he was tossed a few feet backwards, landing on his back. He caught a flash of green in the corner of his eye as he hopped back to his feet. Some mages were openly laughing at him as they prepared more spells. He heard himself physically growl as his anger rose. He let the rage wash over him as he breathed it out and focused back on the mages. There were 4 of them all throwing spells every which way. But as he dodged a few fireballs and a lashing whip of water, he spotted a 5th. The 5th member was behind the others, arms crossed and eyes closed. Shaggy grinned as he figured that was the one casting the shield. One caster using a shield spell couldn't keep it up forever, right? He ducked another fireball and charged again. The obvious sneer on the closest mage's face fueled his rage as he slammed his claws into where he thought the green barrier was. Now that he was ready for the recoil, he only skidded back a few feet. He threw a feral grin at the mages, who still looked annoyingly calm. He swiped his claws into the barrier again and again as he tried to monitor the 5th mage, who was casting it. But the rest of the mages had taken this opportunity to pelt him with various spells. He felt fire and ice collide with his chest, creating a dense mist around him that stung his eyes. Pain flared in his body as he felt his skin burn and freeze before his healing kicked in. He did his best to ignore it as he continued to slam into the barrier. Eventually, a whip of water curled around his ankle and flung him away. He felt his back slam into something soft and he slowly rose to his knees. He felt his skin tingle as it continued to heal, but he thought the healing was slowing down. Looking around, he found himself near Vlad, who was in the middle of tearing a gang member's arm off. The vamp looked like he had gone feral. His eyes were completely black and his fangs were elongated and covered in blood. "Sup, vamps?" Shaggy grunted as he stood. Vlad glanced at him as he took the severed arm in his hands and flung it into another opponent's face. "You kill those mages yet?" Shaggy shook the dust from his body as he grunted. "Nope." "Barrier." Vlad grimaced as he put his hand through someone who was trying to sneak up on him. "Well, the small fries are almost gone. Let's go handle your barrier." Vlad flitted away as Shaggy rushed off in pursuit. As they got closer to the group of mages, Shaggy was happy to see several of them look scared. A quick glance at the barrier mage showed him nursing a nosebleed and looking extremely pale. But standing in their way was the metal lady. Shaggy could only shake his head as Vlad ran into her and bounced off, sending her bodily into the mage's barrier. However, Vlad also came to a full stop, nose broken and bloodied. Oh lord, that sucked. It was like running to a wall. Yeah, Shaggy agreed. She's pretty dense. The metal woman in question was shaking her head and standing back up. Shaggy was sure he saw the green barrier flicker a little as Metal Lady threw an angry look at them. Shaggy patted Vlad's shoulder and waved him toward the mages, showing he would take the slim woman. Vlad just nodded and flitted around the group of mages to the other side. You are free to give up. Shaggy grinned. That's not really how banter works. Shaggy joked as he ducked the obvious punch and slashed out with his claws. He felt his claws rebound multiple times as he circled his opponent. But he kept it up as she continued to throw wild haymakers. He heard a slight cracking and momentarily celebrated, but when his next swipe with his claws brought a twinge of pain to his hand, he backed off. While her metal skin was chipping away, his claws were also cracking under the strain. He could see them healing, but it was very slow. Chip a nail? Metal Lady cackled. Shaggy grimaced and dropped the transformation on his hands and stared across at her. Her shirt was torn to shreds and her metal body was chipped and cracked in places, but he couldn't see any skin underneath. He sighed, as he figured she was probably metal all the way through. Figure it out, little doggy? Shaggy grinned at her. Shaggy. That brought her up short. What? My name is Shaggy. You're right though. My plan wouldn't have worked. Shaggy said, still smiling. Okay. I don't think you realize how this works. We keep fighting until one of us kills the other. Shaggy nodded and crouched slightly, stretching his legs out one at a time. Oh, I get that. Doesn't mean we can't be civil about it. She snorted as she raised a fist. Okay. I'm gonna start hitting you now, and I'm not going to stop until your head is paste. She dashed forward, right arm held high. Shaggy quickly stood from his crouch, dragging his hand through the dirt and coming away with a palmful. He tossed the mass of dirt straight into her eyes and watched her stop short, trip to her knees, and start screaming. Moving quickly, he got behind her again and wrapped an arm around her neck, getting his elbow below her chin. He used his other hand to control her head, and he squeezed as hard as he could. She writhed and kicked as he slowly choked her out. Shaggy could feel her neck pulse as she tried to get air into her lungs, but he held on as she faltered. He followed her down and kept up with the chokehold until he felt her stop moving. He played with the idea of keeping the hold, but he decided he liked her. She was a pain in the ass. Cautiously, in case she was faking, he let go and eased backwards. The sound of screaming nearby drew his attention, and he turned to see Vlad in a pile of bodies. The vampire was wrapped around a mage, fangs extended and blood dripping down his chin. Shaggy could see the skin on Vlad's face repairing itself as the vampire licked his lips. Shaggy gave his friend a wave, checking to see if he was okay. Whenever Vlad fed, it made him a little lethargic and punch-drunk. It was the reason he had been captured in the first place. Although he had said the weaker the blood, the less the feeding would affect him. Shaggy hoped the mages were considered weak. They still had another group to go through. He looked around for Ren and Tinsel. The pair of Paranadans were still standing, and they were amid a few cheering criminals that had been tossed in with Tinsel. Shaggy felt that was premature, but he wasn't about to stop them. He glanced around the arena and finally noticed the low rumble of the cheering crowd. He had ignored it, but since it looked like they had won, the noise redoubled. Their bloodbath disgusting. Vlad said next to him, still using his vampire accent. Shaggy laughed as he looked at his friend. Well, that's one group down, one to go. Let's wait until they are done first. Vlad said, pointing across the arena at where the Phreaks were fighting off a few of the criminals who had headed in their direction. Shaggy nodded in agreement as they moved toward Ren and Tinsel. The two Paranadans looked rough. Well, Tinsel looked rough. Ren seemed to be okay, save for a few bruises and cuts. Shaggy grinned at the big rhino man. Regretting it yet? Ren chuckled as he said. Ding. Shaggy raised an eyebrow. Really? Ren nodded, affirming that the alien player had leveled up mid-fight. The news made Shaggy want to check his own evolution trees, but he stopped himself. Now was really not the time, and he was tired, hurt and oddly hungry. They also had another fight to get through. Vlad sat in the dirt nearby as Ren spoke with Tinsel and the two other NPC criminals. Shaggy looked the NPCs over. There was Tinsel, who still looked worn down, but with a few new bruises. Then there was a humanoid female and an amorphous blue blob in the shape of a man. Shaggy had seen the blob person thrash a few Raks with his tentacle-like arms, but the female was a mystery. He thought about introducing himself, but he decided to wait and sat down in the dirt next to Vlad. Players had learned early on that sitting or laying down increased the regen rate of both the stamina and health bars. As he and Vlad watched the Phreaks fight off the 4 or 5 criminals that had charged them, Shaggy brought up his health and stamina bars. Both were well on their way back up to full HP, 145 of 210. SP, 150 out of 200. He momentarily thought about asking Vlad what his health and stamina were like, so he could compare. But Vlad was an RPer, even if he kept dropping his accent, and they could be weird when talking about in-game numbers. Broke the immersion for some of them. He shook off the thought as Ren and the NPCs joined them and sat down. Shaggy watched an insectoid freak swoop down and take a swipe at a criminal with what looked like a sword. He thought that was a pretty archaic weapon for a modern city, but a feminine voice stopped him from saying anything. "Hi," said the chipper voice. Turning, Shaggy saw the female NPC glancing at him and Vlad smiling. She was as short as he was, around 5'4", and as pale as a ghost. As he studied her face, he saw the desperation behind her smile and wondered what she wanted. Ren made the introductions as Vlad and Shaggy stared at the woman and the humanoid blob creature nearby. Ephemera, this is Shaggy and Vlad. They are kind of co-leaders of this outfit. Both Shaggy and Vlad looked at each other, but didn't disagree, as Ren continued. Vlad, Shaggy, this is Ephemera and Blobby. Hello, Blobby gave a watery greeting as Shaggy turned to look at the creature. They were currently waving an appendage at them. Shaggy grinned as a scream sounded from across the arena. Kind of on the nose, isn't it? Blobby twisted its head appendage in a reasonable approximation of confusion. It is a noble name among my people. Shaggy raised a hand placatingly. I don't doubt it. What can we do for you too? Ren said you might take us on? Ephemera said. Vlad raised an eyebrow. Oh, did he? Hey, I just said we would think about it once we were out of here. Ren defended. That's fair. Shaggy said. But we are pretty new down here. We don't even have a place to work out of. Tinsel spoke up from his place next to Ren. I was actually telling Ren about a place. Not the place they grabbed you, was it? Ren and Tinsel glared at Vlad before Tinsel answered. No. In fact, I was heading there when they grabbed me. They weren't even looking for me. They were looking for that lizard professor who was selling those weapons. Shaggy glanced around before realizing the noise from the crowd was likely overshadowing anything they could say. But just to be safe, he placed a finger to his lips. Tinsel nodded in understanding as Ephemera and Blobby watched the interaction. A scream from across the arena resounded loudly before it was quickly cut off. Looks like they're done, Vlad said, grinning and trying to wipe the dried blood from his chin. Shaggy looked across to see several of the Phreaks surrounding and kicking the prone body of a criminal. He counted 9 of the original 12 they had come in with. Not a lot of damage done, but every little bit helps. He felt his stomach gurgle as he stood up and grabbed a bit of broken pipe from nearby. Turning to look at Ephemera and Blobby, he grinned. Well, looks like we are gonna have tryouts, kids. Ephemera grinned back at him as Blobby shivered in what he guessed was excitement. His stomach gave another loud noise, and he felt a pang of hunger assault him. He ignored it and pointed his pipe at the glaring Phreaks and shouted, "Flyers first this time," Vlad said, as both groups charged at each other. It didn't appear like the Phreaks had brought any ranged attackers. So taking out the highly mobile flyers was an excellent strategy. Shaggy just didn't have any clue how he was going to accomplish that. He watched as a fly-headed Phreak with a female body and 4 rapidly moving wings shot straight into the air and charged at them. The rest of the Phreaks followed her, shouting and growling as they brandished their mutated arms. He saw a few with weapons, but he still hadn't formulated much of a plan as both their groups slammed into each other. His body hit another warm body as their group of 6 hit the larger mass of bodies. He jammed the broken end of his pipe into the nearest body as he rammed into a Phreak with furry cat ears. The Catman went down screaming as the pipe was wrenched from Shaggy's hands. He didn't have enough time to snatch his weapon back up before he was assaulted from several directions. Something pinched around his wrist as he felt a fist slam into his side. Focusing on his wrist, he blindly kicked in the direction the punch had come from. He found his wrist in the grip of a giant red crab claw. The female Phreak's entire left arm was that of a crab and she was smiling evilly as she tried to clamp down harder. Shaggy screamed as he gripped the claw and pulled. He swung the female Phreak in a wide arc as he wrenched the crab claw open. Luckily, his mutant strength was stronger, and he felt the dactyl of claw bend and then snap off. Now she screamed as he kicked her away and turned to look at the fight. But he was struck again from the side as the crab lady's spot was quickly taken up by a rabbit-eared Phreak who was screaming madly and throwing rapid punches at his midsection. The punches didn't hurt, but they were annoying, and the odd swipe from a nearby Phreak member didn't help. He was about to back up out of the scrum of bodies when 2 large bodies crashed into the Phreaks around him. Tinsel and Wren were still injured, but they were throwing wide haymakers, keeping their opponents back. He saw a brave Phreak, who looked like he had a body made of pure stone, step too close and take a large swing from Wren. The Phreak's stone body crumpled as Wren's enormous fist collided the stone man's face. Shaggy grabbed the rabbit Phreak by the collar and jammed his forehead into their nose hard before he looked around. They were doing fairly well. Blobby was nearby, multiple tentacles growing from his body and swinging about wildly. He wasn't doing much damage, but he was harrying a large group of Phreaks. He didn't see Ephemera at first until he noticed the pale woman appear behind a Phreak battling a tentacle. She appeared out of nowhere and stabbed a sword into the Phreak and then disappeared again. Shaggy dodged another punch from the rabbit Phreak as he tried to find Vlad. He punched into the Phreak's throat, causing them to choke violently. Stepping forward, he kicked the poor rabbit man's face and looked around again. A loud screech from above drew his attention, and he saw Vlad wrapped around the insectoid woman and trying to pull her wings off. He wasn't having an easy time of it, as another flyer was trying to yank him off his teammate. Shaggy looked around for something to throw, but most of the weapons were still being used. Nearby, Tinsel threw a kick into a group of Phreaks as Wren lifted and threw one. An idea sparked in his brain and he ran toward Wren, kicking a few of the downed Phreaks as they moved across the dirt arena. "Hey! Big guy! Toss me!" Shaggy shouted, pointing up at Vlad. Wren looked confused for a second as he punched another Phreak in the face. But the big rhino man eventually got it and smiled wide. He moved toward Shaggy and gripped his already ruined shirt and the back of his pants. Shaggy was unceremoniously lifted into the air as Wren spun around once as fast as he could and then let Shaggy fly. Shaggy was surprised it worked as he heard the rest of his shirt rip away into his Paranadan friend's hands. He flew up into the air on a collision course with the 3 bodies currently still stationary in the air. "Coming through!" Shaggy shouted as he grew closer. It was only as he saw the looks on both the Phreaks and Vlad's face did Shaggy realize he really didn't have a plan. What was he going to do? Punch one of them? He grimaced and tried to turn in midair. He was partially successful as the side of his body hit the second flyer. His vision blurred in a mass of bodies as he heard another rip, a loud scream, and he lashed out with both hands, trying to grip something. But he couldn't find anything as gravity took hold of his body. Shaggy tried to think of something as his body was plummeting through the air. But the only thing that occurred to him was to not fall straight, so as he hit the ground, he threw himself forward, trying to help mitigate the damage. But he heard and felt something in his left leg pop loudly, and he gave a howl-like scream of pain as he went face down in the dirt. He rolled painfully onto his front and looked down to see his leg bent at an odd angle. He patiently grit his teeth and waited for it to heal, but nothing happened. Instead, a loud grumble resounded from his stomach. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," Shaggy thought as he dragged himself painfully away from the battle. "My regeneration is powered by food?" As he bit his lip painfully, he looked around. He saw the body of the second flyer lying on the ground unmoving, but Vlad and the insectoid lady were gone. The fight looked to be winding down as Ren and Tinsel absolutely decimated the Phreaks. Blobby was helping too, but the amorphous being wasn't really a heavy hitter, and Ephemera had done her disappearing trick again. "You," a voice shouted from nearby. Shaggy glanced around again until he saw the other flyer was now standing up. Except now the man's butterfly wings looked torn, and he was bleeding from his head. The butterfly man looked livid as he limped over toward Shaggy. The Phreak picked up a broken weapon from nearby as he trudged slowly closer. Shaggy didn't really get a look at the man's weapon, as he was busy trying to summon his claws. Shaggy found that his claws weren't coming, though. He couldn't get his mental state back to one that would help with his partial transformation. Probably something to do with the angry Phreak barreling down on him. As the Phreak grew closer, he raised his chosen weapon up over his head. Shaggy belatedly noticed it was a broken sword as he tried to get an arm up to block the swing. He preemptively grit his teeth and tried to think of a counter for when his arm was chopped off. Shaggy waited for the blow to fall, and waited, and waited, and waited. Eventually, he put his arm down and glanced up to see the butterfly man stood stock still with Vlad's mouth clamped down on his neck. Shaggy sighed and laid back in the dirt. "We have got to stop meeting like this." Vlad finished his meal and then stood there in his usual post-feeding stupor. The vampire just grinned drunkenly as he swayed on the spot. Shaggy took a cautious look around and noticed that the other Phreaks were all on the ground and his crew were taking a few pot shots at the ones that were still alive. Ephemera was visible again, and she was gleefully stabbing sharp objects into a begging Phreak. He grimaced, but put his head back down into the dirt, closed his eyes, and tried to ignore the pain screaming through his leg. Nearby, he heard Vlad sit down in the dirt. "What's up with you?" Vlad asked, slurring a little. "Apparently, my healing is contingent on me having a full belly." Vlad grunted. Shaggy wasn't sure if he was agreeing or stifling a laugh. "Makes sense. Power like that has to have limits. Eyes need to feed for mine." Shaggy opened his eyes and looked across at his in-game friend. "Seriously, dude, you gotta mitigate that feeding stupor thing." Vlad waved him off. "I'm on it, I'm on it." Shaggy didn't push it as he heard footsteps approaching. Looking up again, he saw Ren and the NPCs coming toward them. Behind them, the ringmaster was slowly descending on the metal platform. The ringmaster looked absolutely overjoyed as they clapped and cheered along with the crowd. Shaggy thought he saw the ringmaster even boo a few times, commiserating with fans. But Ephemera and Blobby stepped into his vision. Ephemera was grinning widely. "So how did we do, boss man?" Vlad just raised a thumb as Shaggy grinned back. "Y'all did great. Really. Once we are all out of here, we can meet up at Tinsel's place and discuss business." Ephemera glanced questioningly at Vlad, who was still coming off the blood stupor, but Blobby wriggled. Shaggy assumed happily. Once Vlad didn't disagree, Ephemera also cackled happily. "Sounds good, boss man. But if you think we are leaving your side right now, you're crazy." "Agreed," Blobby added in its watery voice. Shaggy stared questioningly at the two until Tinsel explained. "They were unaffiliated when they got tossed in here. People who knew that and wanted them to die in here would try to kill them later. Wouldn't surviving with us curtail that? Vlad asked, sounding more lucid now. Tinsel just shrugged. Probably not, and why should they risk it? Right now, we should stick together until we get to where we are going. I need food. Shaggy muttered as the ringmaster appeared in their midst, grinning madly, with their wand pointed at themselves. Whores and pimps. We have a winner. Against all odds, it looks like those rotten low-down criminals have been exonerated of their crimes, and this unknown crew has saved their fellow member. Shall we give them a round of applause? Cheering and booing resounded through the arena. Shaggy felt the ground shake as the assembled villains stomped their collective feet. The ringmaster twirled their hat at the end of their finger, before bowing to all of them and speaking into the wand again. Well, my newly released friends. Will you be fighting again in our fine arena? Shaggy and the others stared at the flamboyant ringmaster, before Ren gave a curt no. The ringmaster went on to describe the next event as Ren moved to help Shaggy up. The pain in his leg flared, and he yelped in pain as he was unceremoniously hoisted over Ren's shoulder. Ephemera and Blobby followed along as Vlad and Tinsel lead the way. They were heading for the southern arena entrance, as Ren said. Told ya, we need a healer. Just get me some food. Shaggy muttered. But you ain't wrong. Their group trooped down a short flight of stairs, before they came face to face with a large wooden door. Ren went to push it open, but the door swung open themselves, revealing a tired-looking Slink. He was standing next to a comically large lever built into the wall next to the door. The teenage boy gave them an awkward wave. Hey, guys. Shaggy felt Ren wave as he lifted his body to glance at the scene. Vlad nearby scoffed and adopted his vampire accent again. Took you long enough. Next time, don't wait for us to win before you get involved. Slink grumbled and stepped alongside them as they walked into the arena's underground level. You looked like you were doing fine. Also, I think I was being watched. If I had pulled the lever, I feel like I would have gone straight to Deathville. Good instinct. A voice said from ahead of them. Out of the shadows, a female alien stepped into the light. She wore a fancy, clean business suit that was at odds with their surroundings. Her orange skin seemed to glow as it caught the light, and she adjusted her glasses and looked them over. My boss would like a word with all of you. This way. Before any of them agreed, she was already walking away down the circular hallway. Shaggy and the others looked at each other before they all shrugged. Ren and the others followed the well-dressed woman until she stopped near a sign that read, Locker Room. She waved them toward the door without saying a word. Even with Ren ducking down, Shaggy's head still clipped the door as they went through. He grimaced as his nose was immediately assaulted by the smell of sweat and blood. Ren made his way into what looked like a standard locker room, complete with full-length lockers and wide wooden benches bolted to the floor. Standing near a locker, smoking a cigarette and dressed in a purple suit, was a human man. He looked to be about 40 years old, with graying hair and faint wrinkles under his eyes. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes as he took them in. Ren set Shaggy down on the wooden bench. The others piled into the narrow row as the stocky man glanced between all of them. Shaggy felt his nose twitch at the smell of the cigarette. So, yous guys did a good job today? Made the Raku family some money, killed a few of them freakazoids, and even made a small name for your crew. Such as it is. The man's accent reminded Shaggy of the old vids he had seen of pre-unification New York. After the world unification, most accents had gone the way of fossil fuels, reality TV, and war. But a lot of games and vids liked to make use of them. It sounded off to Shaggy, but he just shrugged and started to speak, but the man cut him off. Of course, yous guys also threw a couple of ours a beating. Something I will bet our guys ain't gonna like. But the rules of the arena are absolute. The man shouted, smile still not reaching his eyes. But you lot should stay off our turf in the future. Who knows what could happen to you? Undertown is a dangerous place. Where exactly were you thinking about setting up shop, anyway? None of our guys have heard of ya. You part of them new crop of villains that just came to the city? Shaggy kept his mouth shut. Although the information about how the game was incorporating its recent launch was interesting. All the launch day players were considered to have just moved into the city, apparently. He was happy Ren, Slink, and Vlad also kept their mouths shut, but Tinsel spoke up. We were thinking about Dirt Row, Mr. Tilani. Mr. Tilani took a long drag of his cigarette, looking at each of them before he nodded. He put out his cigarette on a nearby locker before straightening his suit and spoke again. Good. That's real good. Dirt Row is nowhere near Raku territory and on the edge of Phreak territory. If them lizards don't get involved in things, that is. Did you know them big lizards were seen wielding the same weapons what your friend here got caught with? Shaggy shook his head. Nope. Didn't know that. Mighty interestin', wouldn't you say? My fellow family members would love to know where that lot got some of them weapons. They ain't much overall. I mean, a gun is still way more useful than a spear or some claws, in my opinion, but I guess you could call it professional curiosity. Shaggy and his friends remained quiet as Mr. Tilani moved his gaze between them. Getting no answer, he shrugged his shoulders, fake smile still plastered on his face. No one? Not a one of you knows? Am I to believe that these weapons just dropped from the sky one day? That some unknown lizard didn't show up one day and start hawking these same weapons on the main street of Undertown? In obvious violation of the accords set down by the Big Five, now the Big Four. It seems you are quite aware of where these weapons came from. So, why question us? Vlad spoke up, in full vampire mode, flashing his fangs and grinning dangerously. Mr. Tilani didn't bat an eye as he answered. Ah. Call it a test of loyalty. A test which you all failed. A test that may very well change the way you lot get to do business down here. Shaggy chuckled, causing Mr. Tilani's smile to drop as he turned an ugly scowl on the werewolf. I think, Mr. Tilani, we just proved our loyalty very well. Mr. Tilani took a second and let a long breath out of his nostrils. Shaggy thought he saw a flicker of smoke appear below the man's nose, but it was gone too fast. Mr. Tilani collected himself before he reached into his purple suit and pulled out a cigarette case. Lighting another cigarette, he took a long drag before he turned his eyes back to Shaggy. You know, it appears you did. Let us all hope it is not misplaced. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a few children to discipline. Mr. Tilani stomped out of the locker room, leaving a waft of cigarette smoke in his wake. As he slammed the door, Shaggy saw the NPCs all flinch before they turned scared glances at Vlad and Shaggy. Shaggy put a hand up, forestalling all conversation as he gestured for Ren to pick him up. Food first, please. I would like to be able to walk before we have any kind of conversation about what just happened. Vlad nodded as he led the way out of the locker room. The vampire took a cautious look around the large hallway of the arena before he started walking for a nearby staircase that went to the ground level of the arena. Behind Ren, he watched Ephemera and Tinsel have a whispered conversation. He wondered if they regretted their association with them, but he shook it off as the smell of hamburgers, hot dogs, and popcorn filled his nose. So this Mr. Tilly is some kind of hotshot with the Raku? Shaggy asked as he finished his fourth hot dog. They had left the arena, and Vlad and Slink had picked up some food from a stall near the entrance. After scarfing down 4 hot dogs and some soda, Shaggy's legs had healed, and he was now walking behind Tinsel. The NPC was leading them toward what he called Dirt Row while explaining who they had just met. Mr. Tilani. Tinsel corrected. And yeah, he has some pull with a lot of the lower-level guys in their organization. Ren grunted. Why not just say, gang? The dude has a lot of pull in their gang. I don't know. It's what they call themselves. They try to stay away from any criminal talk, because they don't want to draw attention when they are above ground. Tinsel shrugged. Shaggy glanced around as they continued down the dirt path, heading north, away from the arena. The standard broken-down shacks grew closer and closer together as they walked. He thought he saw a few faces peer out at them around dirt-covered curtains, and more than a few lights went out as they passed. Most of Undertown had seemed unwelcoming, but Shaggy thought that the nearby NPCs seemed downright scared. Before he could ask about it though, Tinsel took a hard right and started walking east. The Paranadon had to squeeze his colossal frame between two buildings, and Shaggy swore he saw one of the building tilt, but Tinsel made it through fine. Ephemera and Blobby went through next, the latter conforming their gelatinous body through the narrow space. Vlad and Shaggy glanced at each other before turning to Ren. The Paranadon player grimaced before he pushed his way between the squat buildings and followed their guide. Shaggy and Vlad waited to see if either of the buildings fell over. Once they were sure it was safe, they followed, with Shaggy bringing up the rear. As he passed between the sheet metal buildings, he thought he could hear shuffling coming from within. He ignored it as he came out the other side. They stood in a narrow alley between the squat buildings. Ren and Tinsel looked particularly uncomfortable. Blobby seemed fine squashed, as they were, against an old bike tire and a couple of metal trash cans. Vlad was watching the nearby houses before he glanced back at Tinsel. The question was obvious in his eyes. The NPC was standing there, obviously waiting for something. Before Vlad could ask, Ephemera appeared in the middle of their narrow alley. She had her typical mad grin on her face as she looked at Tinsel and Ren. "You were right, Tin. It's dark as all hell, but it's there." Shaggy tried to look around and guess what she was talking about, but he couldn't see anything. Eventually, he gave up and tried to ask, but Tinsel answered their unasked questions. "So a couple of years ago, there was another gang in Undertown, the Con Crew." Tinsel began. They were a group of aliens, mutants, and magic users who specialized in underground work. Shaggy raised an eyebrow. "What? Like black market stuff? Assassinations and such?" Tinsel laughed. "Ha ha ha. No. Nothing like that. The Con Crew literally worked underground. They would dig into banks and other types of buildings and steal things. They were even asked to expand Undertown by some of the bigger gangs. And then they were killed off." Ren sighed. Shaggy and Vlad stared at their friend, but the big alien shrugged his shoulders. "It makes the most sense. A group of people capable of building tunnels into and out of various gangs' territories. They weren't going to let that kind of crew last long." "Sure, but there have to be other Earth-based mages or aliens around." "What? Do the Big Four just kill them all?" Shaggy asked. "Or maybe they hire them?" Vlad guessed. "The gangs are more careful now," Tinsel explained. "They keep an eye out for any diggers that show up in Undertown. They'll hire or kill any that come down here, but mostly, they've got a lot of their territories warded against underground incursions. It wasn't cheap from what I hear." Ephemera snickered. "So I take it we're heading underground?" Shaggy asked. Tinsel nodded as he pointed to a patch of ground. "Yeah, there's a sort of tunnel system below us we can get to if we dig here." "How did you get down there?" Vlad asked, turning to Ephemera. The pale brunette smiled as she disappeared from where she stood, reappearing next to Vlad. "I'm not just invisible when phase. My body goes intangible. My people make excellent spies. Just saying." Shaggy felt his eyebrows go up in surprise as he glanced between Ren and Vlad. They were obviously thinking the same thing. That power seemed OP as all hell. Something must have shown on their faces, because the short woman coughed before she continued. "Ahem, but some types of vision can see us. Oh, and magic. Plus, we have to reappear to touch anything." Shaggy nodded as he saw Tinsel shift from foot to foot. Sighing, he said, "Either way, I guess we have to start digging. Not to mention find some way for us to see down there." Ren added. "I can help with moving dirt," Boss Blobby said, shifting its body to stand next to Shaggy. Vlad was going through the nearby trash as he spoke up. "Go for it, Blobby. We'll search around for something to light on fire." Blobby flattened their body and seemed to dissolve into the dirt as Shaggy joined the others in looking around the alley. There was plenty of trash to light on fire, but it quickly became apparent they had no way to start a fire. Shaggy glanced between the others as they all searched their pockets. Seriously? No one has a lighter or anything? Shaggy complained. Maybe there's something in one of these houses. A voice said behind him. Shaggy spun quickly, transforming his hand into a set of claws. He felt the others all shift into combat positions. He came face to face with Slink. The young alien looked concerned as their group all turned on him. But his concern quickly turned into annoyance as he seemed to figure out why they were surprised. Luckily, the boy was skinny enough to fit comfortably between the two buildings. He had obviously been leaning up against a building, listening to them. Shaggy scratched the back of his head as he tried to avoid eye contact with his friend. He had forgotten all about the youngest member of their crew. By the looks on the others' faces, they had as well. Well, Vlad coughed. Of course not. You just surprised us. Your race must have some bonuses to stealth. You know, to help you with your scouting. Slink didn't look like he believed the mutant vampire, but luckily a sound drew everyone's attention back to the center of the alley. Looking at the dirt where Blobby had disappeared, Shaggy could see the dirt bubbling and roiling as if something were moving underneath it. Soon, spots of Blobby's blue skin popped into existence. The slime person was slowly shifting upward in a flat square shape. As they shifted, the dirt sank into their blue skin. Shaggy could see the clumps of dirt dissolve as they floated in Blobby's translucent form. The blob was eating its way upward. Should we move some of the dirt? Slink asked as they watched. I mean, how much can they eat? Ephemera shrugged. Mucunoids are known for their prodigious appetites. Let's wait and see if they ask for help. For now, we need to find some way to start a fire. Shaggy said. Everyone nodded as they continued their search of the cramped alley. But it was becoming apparent that they would have to search the houses. Vlad, Ren, and Shaggy shared a look before they all turned to Slink. The young man still looked miffed at having been forgotten. Just check the houses without people first. Ren said, giving the boy a stern look. Slink threw up his hands. What for? You think someone just left some matches lying around? Maybe an old-fashioned stove? One that uses gas? Come on. Well, we need something, Shaggy said. Or else those of you without any sort of night vision are going to be blind down there. Like us. Ren said, waving a hand. Between himself and Tinsel. Ephemera also nodded. Yeah, dark tunnels are always bad. Especially in Undertown. Who knows what could be down there, and I would prefer to at least see what ends up eating me. Blobby had finished his munching on their dirt meal, and there was now a rather large, square hole in the ground. My people don't really perceive the world like those of you with optical nerves. But I would also prefer some light. Also, the tunnel is complete. I ran into another already constructed tunnel down there. Tinsel nodded. That would be it. What's it? Shaggy, Vlad, and Ren all asked simultaneously. Nearby, Slink was leaning up against a building with his eyes closed. The young teen shifted from foot to foot as Tinsel explained. So the con crew, underground experts, help the old gangs build out Undertown. But afterward they are hunted. What do you think a crew of diggers will do once they have to run for their lives? Dig escape tunnels? Shaggy asked, slightly excited. Not just tunnels, Tinsel began before Ephemera snorted. Oh, please, you can't be serious. You don't honestly believe the old bolt holes theory? She asked. Tinsel just pointed a large gray finger down at the square hole. As if its existence proved everything. She just snorted again. Please. We all know the con crew built escape tunnels every which way down there. But there has been no proof that some sort of hidden cache or hideout was built down there. Tinsel just crossed his massive arms across his chest and glanced down at the hole. The smaller woman looked between the hole and everyone else present before she threw her hands in the air in exasperation. Shaggy glanced between his friends before he realized Slink was gone. "Slink?" he said, looking around for the inexperienced player. The others looked around as well until Slink's voice echoed from a nearby house. He had apparently snuck off into an empty house. At least Shaggy hoped it was empty. "Curly thinks he found something in here." Ren walked closer to the squat metal building the boy's voice was coming from. He checked the sheet metal wall of the home. Coming to some kind of decision, the big alien reached out and grabbed a side of the wall. Shaggy saw Ren's arm muscles tense as he ripped down the wall of the house. Everyone cringed as the sound of screeching metal echoed in their small alley. Shaggy had to cover his ears as his enhanced hearing went nuts at the sound of tearing metal. He saw Vlad also cradle his own head, as Ren curled the thin metal wall up like an old blanket. Once Ren finished and the noise died down, they all got a look at an astonished Slink standing in what looked like an abandoned living room. He was holding an old-fashioned lighter as one of his green snakes slithered into his pant leg. "Well, it's better than nothing," Vlad said, back again to his accent. Shaggy looked around at everyone. "So we are doing this? Even if we don't know if anything is down there?" Tinsel straightened up, looking affronted. "It's down there. Or at least some hidden cache is down there." "Based on what, Tin? Hearsay? You haven't given us a lot to go on," Ren said as he helped Slink out of the abandoned house. "I knew one of the con crew, okay?" Tinsel said, throwing up his hands. "He was one of the con crew that got away, and he used to do jobs with my mom and dad. He always used to talk about all the bolt holes and hideaways his old crew planned on building down there." "Planned on," Shaggy said, sounding dubious. Vlad shrugged his shoulders. "It's a little more to go on, and besides, I would like to find a headquarters of some sort before I have to log out." Slink and Ren were breaking down an old chair and making some makeshift torches. Ren was nodding along as Vlad spoke, and Slink also agreed. "Yeah, it's been fun, but I might have to go soon, anyway." Shaggy shrugged and looked at Blobby and Ephemera, both of whom looked contemplative. "Well, I guess we are going down into the dark, scary pit." Shaggy, again, thanked the game developers in his mind as he glanced around the small, round tunnel. Even without Ren and Tinsel's makeshift torches, he could see fairly well. Although it was only in black and white. It was no worse than any other VR MMO. In fact, he thought he could see more. He could make out the shape and size of the new tunnel even before the others had joined him. He had fallen a respectful distance before he landed in the rather enormous shaft. It was well over 9 feet high and big enough across for both Ren and Tinsel to walk side by side. He gave a low whistle as the others joined him, and he could see their agreement with his sentiment written on their collective faces. The tunnel seemed to extend both east and west, and after a quick debate, their group headed east. As they walked, Shaggy monitored the tunnel's walls. Just in case, the dirt shifted and they would have to make a quick exit. But the walls seemed unnaturally sturdy, with little to no dirt shifting as they walked by. Even when one of the others brushed up against a wall, the compacted earth seemed to be as solid as concrete. Shaggy was about to put it down to the skill level of the infamous con crew when he felt the dirt shift slightly beneath his feet. He glanced around at the others to see if they had felt it as well. But Tinsel was still leading Ren and Slink at the front of their group, telling tales of his career as a low-level henchman for the other gangs. Ephemera and Blobby were in the middle of their group, following along quietly while adding the occasional quip to Tinsel's stories. It was just Vlad and himself at the back of their little group, but even the vampire seemed to be distracted in his menus. Shaggy glanced at his friends before he shrugged it off and continued to follow the group further down the tunnel. The ground had only shifted for a few seconds, and the overall integrity of the walls seemed to be intact. But just in case, he calmed his breath and shifted his hands into his claws. The change was becoming easier, and he had almost mastered the zen-like state he needed to put his mind into in order to summon them. He was never one to fly off the handle in real life, but the almost meditative state required to shift was new to him. He suspected the game was giving him a lot of leeway with activating his powers. especially because of AGE Incorporated's mix-up with his powers. There was no telling how much the glitch had set back his progress. Although he was doing fairly well for himself, he really hoped whatever sensei/teacher that was supposed to come along and teach him about his powers would hurry. Whoever they were supposed to contact the various Therianthrope players right after the tutorial event. But because of the glitch, none of the mutant Therianthropes got their teacher. They had barely walked another 15 feet before Shaggy felt the low rumble again. This time, he saw Vlad's head pop up just as part of the wall near the vampire gave way. Shaggy dashed forward and, for the first time, he moved faster than the vampire player. A large gray slug-like creature emerged from the wall, circular mouth opened wide, displaying multiple rows of teeth. Shaggy quickly slashed downward with his claws. He felt a slight twinge in his hand as he contacted the creature's teeth, but the rest of the large grub was sliced in two. The others turned around as Shaggy and Vlad glanced around at the dirt walls. Shaggy noticed that the hole the thing had leapt out of was now closed. A wall of dirt back where it had been. What the hell was that? Shaggy asked as he felt his hand heal the minor cut he had gotten. Ran and Vlad both shook their heads, while Tinsel and Ephemera looked speculative. Blobby was their usual nondescript self. Slink was frantically looking at the tunnel walls as if they were about to come alive and eat him. Ephemera eventually snapped her fingers and raised a hand. Maybe it was one of those Sendentian worms? There was a rumor that a crate of the things went missing from a UGB warehouse, right? Tinsel wagged his massive head noncommittally before he agreed. That sounds right. But this thing looks too small. Maybe it's a baby? Shaggy glanced down at the 2-foot-long gray slug. He raised an eyebrow at Tinsel, but said nothing. But the message was clear: if this was the baby, they really didn't want to see the mama. Shaggy sighed as he shook green blood off of his claws. So, do we have a destination? I really don't want to be wandering around down here with those things. Shaggy saw Vlad and Ren nod in agreement. He was surprised that Slink hadn't been more vocal, but a quick glance around showed that the teenage alien was missing again. He was about to angrily shout at the boy, but he was interrupted. Hey! I think I found something. Everyone twisted around in the tunnel, looking everywhere. However, they couldn't find Slink. They had to follow his constant shouting, which led to a dirt wall further along the tunnel. Shaggy and the rest of his group started feeling along the wall until Vlad eventually found it. Part of the wall was a type of hologram, or maybe magically enchanted. Shaggy didn't know, but their group eagerly piled through the fake opening. On the other side, they found a grinning Slink in a large rectangular room. Shaggy guessed it was at least 30 feet across and went at least 50 feet back. But the biggest jackpot, in Shaggy's opinion, was the pile of crates stacked up in the back right corner of the room. Shaggy barked a small chuckle as he rubbed his hands together and started marching toward that side of the room. He felt the others turn with him, but he was stopped as someone grabbed his arm. Hold up. Slink whispered. Shaggy shot a questioning look at Slink. But the young alien just raised a finger to his lips and then pointed down at the crates. Their group stopped and watched the crates for a short while. Shaggy was just about to ask what they were waiting for when several of those gray slug creatures crawled across the top of a crate. Shaggy wasn't sure, but he thought he could see something in one of the thing's mouth. Ephemera gave a quiet groan. Oh man. All the good stuff is probably gone. Sure, whispered Ren, but we can still use the room. We just gotta evict the slugs. Shouldn't be too hard. Shaggy said, transforming his claws and marching forward. He felt Vlad flit up to his side, and he glanced at his pale mutant friend. The vampire just gave him a wink and whispered. As co-leader, I can't have you showing me up now, can I? Shaggy just snorted as the pair of them fell upon the gray slug monsters. Between the both of them, it was relatively quick work to dispatch the creature. Whatever they had gorged themselves on from the crate made them sluggish and easy to pin down. Although both Vlad and Shaggy were grossed out by the slimy residue the things left on their nails and claws, respectively. Soon, the 7 of them were standing in the center of the square room, taking in its 4 brown dirt walls. "It's not much," Shaggy said. "But it has potential." "Really, Ren? What? You want to redecorate? A couple of throw pillows, maybe a TV news reporter?" Vlad chuckled to himself. Shaggy and the others stared at the vampire, who coughed and shook his head. Shaggy thought he heard Vlad mutter something about uncultured swine, but he ignored it as he glanced around. The NPCs were going through the remains of the crates, trying to salvage what was left of them. He agreed that the place needed some work, but he didn't think it was that bad either. But is this place even a hideout? What's the criteria for an in-game lair anyway? Ren chuckled. Oh, there's no way this will count as a lair. We would need a way bigger team and a way more space. But it might qualify as a hideout. But how do we know if this is one? Slink asked. Well, we have to get at least 4 players in the room and wait for a bit, and if the room meets the criteria, a hideout console will appear. Ren said after a slight cough. Shaggy thought the large alien player sounded like he was reading for a forum post. But he and the others scanned the room a few times. He was about to think Ren was talking nonsense when Slink shouted out. "Whoa! Is that it?" They all turned to look just as a ghostly metal stand was phasing into existence. The small metal thing looked like a metal standing desk some people used at Shaggy's old job. Behind him, he heard Vlad snort. "Well, that sort of breaks the immersion, doesn't it?" "Oh, leave it alone, vamp," Shaggy muttered as he walked over to the console. Behind him, he heard Ren say. "Well, with that, this should be a logout spot for us now." The large Paranadan went back into his menus before he smiled. "Yep. We can set this as a home point now. Which I will do right now. Also, I have to log, I have the night shift so I got to go. But I'll see you all later." Shaggy glanced back just in time to see the large gray alien disappear. Vlad also looked like he was going through his menus, same with Slink. "Oh, come on, you 3 are gonna leave me with all the base building stuff?" Slink just smiled as he muttered. "School." Vlad, meanwhile, shrugged. "Hey, if you want to wait for us, be my guest. But I have other commitments. I'll be back in the morning, though." Shaggy sighed as he watched both of them disappear into motes of light. He was now alone, underground, with 3 NPCs rummaging around in random junk nearby. He scratched the back of his head as he glanced down at the holographic interface for their new hideout. Well, this can't be too bad. How difficult can it be? He said out loud as he pored through the various selections.